Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? They called her the child who never slept. Parents whispered about her in trembling voices, warning their kids to be in bed before midnight or she'd appear at their window, eyes wide open, never blinking, forever watching. But no one ever really believed she was real. Just another story to keep children in line. A bedtime scare tactic. But what if I told you she was real? What if I told you the first time I saw her, she was already in my house? It began on a night like any other, except for one thing. I couldn't sleep. I was 12. We had just moved to Grayson Hollow, a small, forgettable town pressed up against the edge of the woods, the kind of place where people lock their doors, not because they're scared of crime, but because they know the stories. My mother said the fresh start would help us heal. My father had died just 8 months before, and she thought new surroundings might soften the grief. I never told her, but I hated her for moving us here. I hated the creaking floors, the crooked hallway, the smell of damp earth that seemed to breathe from the basement. And I especially hated that room, my bedroom. It wasn't the biggest in the house, but it had a window facing the woods, which my mom thought would be peaceful. What she didn't know was that those woods weren't quiet. Not at night. Not when the wind started whispering in voices that weren't the wind. Not when something out there seemed to be waiting, not moving, just watching. That night, the first night it all started, I woke to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the old house settling. It was humming. Soft, delicate, a child's voice, a tune that didn't come from any lullaby I'd ever heard. I sat up, unsure if I was still dreaming. The humming grew louder, drifting in from my window. That's when I saw the girl. She was standing outside, not moving. Her skin was pale, almost blue in the moonlight. Her hair was long and black, soaked like she'd just crawled out of a pond. But it was her eyes that froze me. They were open, wide, impossibly wide, and she wasn't blinking. Not once, just humming and staring straight at me. I scrambled back, falling off the bed with a thud loud enough to wake the dead. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked once, and she was gone. Just like that. The next morning, I told my mom. She brushed it off, said it was probably a bad dream. When I insisted, she got annoyed. There's no girl outside your window. Do you want me to call a doctor? So I stopped talking about it. But I didn't stop seeing her. She came again the next night. And the night after that, always at the same time, 3:07 a.m. I checked the clock every time. She would just stand there, humming that tune, never blinking, always staring. Until one night, she wasn't outside anymore. She was in my room. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the shadows, the sense that I wasn't alone. I sat up slowly, barely breathing. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and there she was, crouched in the corner, as still as a broken doll. She wasn't humming. She wasn't even moving. But her eyes, they glowed faintly, eye-catching the moonlight. I could feel them pulling me in, dragging me toward something cold and endless. And then she smiled. That was the first time I screamed. My mom rushed in, flicked on the lights, and of course, the girl was gone. I begged her to believe me. I cried. I swore I wasn't lying. I didn't care if it sounded crazy. I just wanted someone else to see her. But my mom didn't understand. Instead, she took me to a therapist. His name was Dr. Kettering, and he had the warm smile of someone who'd seen too much. He listened patiently, nodding as I described the girl, the humming, the eyes, the way she just appeared. But something changed when I mentioned the time, 3:07 a.m. He stopped writing. His smile faltered. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he leaned forward and asked me a question I didn't expect. Did she say anything to you? I shook my head. No, she just hums. He sat back slowly. If she starts speaking, you tell me immediately. That's when I realized he believed me. He never said it out loud, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't hearing this for the first time. I could see the weight of memories in the way his fingers trembled slightly when he handed me a glass of water. He knew something, but he never told me what. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That night, she came back. But this time, she wasn't alone. It was subtle. At first, just a second shadow near the window, slightly taller, slightly more twisted. Its arms were too long. Its head tilted in an unnatural way, but it didn't step into the room. Not yet. The girl did. She stood at the foot of my bed, her wet hair dripping onto the floor. And this time, she spoke. "I'm not alone anymore," she whispered, her voice like wind through broken glass. "He's hungry." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, locked in place by something unseen. Her eyes held mine, and behind her, the tall figure twitched. "What do you want?" I choked out. She smiled wider. "We want you to remember." Remember what? I had no idea what she meant. But something inside me stirred. A memory, half buried. A lake, a scream, a small hand slipping from mine. And then, darkness. I woke up on the floor, drenched in sweat, my voice hoarse from screaming. My mom found me like that. She didn't say anything, just held me, rocking back and forth until the sun came up. But something had changed in her too. That morning, I noticed a stack of old papers on the kitchen table. Newspaper clippings, yellowed photographs. She tried to hide them when I walked in, but I saw one headline before she could grab it. "Local boy drowns in Stillwater Lake. Sister missing, presumed dead." The picture beneath it showed a familiar face. My face, except younger, and next to me, a girl, dark hair, pale skin, eyes wide open. I confronted my mom, shaking with confusion and fear. She broke down. The truth unraveled like a slow poison. I had a sister. Her name was Elsie. I was 6. She was 4. We went to Stillwater Lake for a picnic. I wandered off. She followed me. We weren't supposed to be near the water, but we were. Something happened. I fell in. She tried to help, but I was bigger. I dragged her down with me. Only I came back up. No one found her body. I'd forgotten everything, blocked it out, but she hadn't. Elsie hadn't forgotten. She'd been waiting, watching, and now she wasn't alone. My mom told me more about the others. Other kids in town who claimed to see a girl with unblinking eyes. Some of them disappeared. Others went mad. The town hushed it up, said it was grief, trauma, sleepwalking. But it wasn't. Stillwater Lake had taken her. And now, something else had brought her back. Dr. Kettering called the next day. He said he needed to see me immediately. Said there were things I had to know. Things he couldn't say over the phone. My mom drove me to his office. But when we got there, the door was ajar. The smell hit us first, like rot and mold and something older than death. We stepped inside slowly. The lights flickered overhead, papers were scattered everywhere. And in the center of the room, Dr. Kettering's body, or what was left of it. His mouth was wide open, eyes frozen in terror. A single phrase was scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. He remembered. We left town that night. But you can't outrun what's already inside you. I still hear the humming. I still wake at 3:07 a.m. I still see her. And now I know what she wants. She doesn't just want to be remembered. She wants me to join her. To never sleep, just like her. It didn't matter how far we drove. The moment the tires hit the edge of Grayson Hollow and crossed the county line, I felt the shift. A pressure in the air. Like we'd driven out of a trap and into something far worse. My mother was silent the whole ride. Her knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. The rearview mirror kept catching her eyes, darting to the back seat over and over again, as if she half expected to see something, or someone, sitting behind us. I didn't blame her. I felt it too. That constant, crawling sensation just beneath the skin, like we were being watched, followed. And then the humming started again. It was faint at first, like a memory trying to claw its way to the surface. But it grew louder the farther we got from the town. My mother didn't mention it. Maybe she didn't hear it. Or maybe she was pretending not to, hoping that silence would somehow make it go away. But I heard it, clear and slow, threaded through the hum of the engine like a whisper on a dying breath. That song. That awful, impossible melody. It didn't belong to anything living. We stopped that night in a cheap roadside motel 3 towns over. The air conditioning unit rattled like something was trapped inside. The walls were thin enough to hear the couple next door arguing about something pointless and cruel. And even through all of that, the humming never stopped. I didn't sleep. Not a second. I lay in bed, eyes glued to the water-stained ceiling, waiting. I knew she would come. Knew she would find me. You don't escape something like this. Not when it's tied to your blood. Not when it's your own sister. At 3:07 a.m., I felt the cold. It rolled in like fog, thick and suffocating. The room darkened, shadows stretching into shapes they shouldn't take. And then the bathroom light flickered on, though neither of us had touched the switch. The door creaked open slowly, revealing only darkness inside. No reflection in the mirror. No sound of dripping water. Just silence, until she stepped out. Her feet were bare, wet, leaving no footprints on the carpet. Her hair clung to her face in long, black strands, twisted and clotted with mud. But her eyes burned. Elsie didn't speak at first. She just stood there, staring at me with that same empty expression. But it wasn't blank. No, it was focused, intent. She tilted her head to one side, the same way she used to do when she was little and trying to understand something she didn't like. The humming swelled in my ears, louder now, drilling straight into my skull. "Why did you forget me?" she whispered. My mouth went dry. I wanted to answer, but nothing came out. I didn't forget her. Not really. I buried it. I buried her. I didn't mean to. I finally croaked. I was a kid. I didn't know. "You let go," she said, voice sharper. "You let go of my hand." I sat up, trembling. "You were trying to save me. I died," she said. "You lived. And now he's hungry again." That name again. He. The tall figure that lingered behind her in the shadows. The one who hadn't spoken yet. The one who didn't need to. "What is he?" I asked, barely breathing. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped backward into the bathroom. The light above flickered violently, and then, in the mirror, I saw him. Not her, him. Tall, impossibly tall. His body was made of angles that shouldn't exist. Limbs too long. Neck crooked like it had been broken and never healed. His face, or what was left of one, was a smear of void. No mouth, no eyes. But somehow I felt his stare. And then, a sound that wasn't quite a growl, but deeper, like something breaking inside the earth. And they were gone. The humming stopped. The room warmed. The shadows pulled back into corners. But I knew this wasn't over. The next day, my mother didn't say a word about the night before. But I could tell she hadn't slept either. She looked older. Her face drawn, her hands shaking. At the gas station, while I was in the bathroom, she made a phone call. I only caught one part of the conversation, just as I stepped out into the hallway. "It's happening again," she whispered into the receiver. "Yes, he's remembering." When she noticed me, she hung up quickly. Didn't say who it was. Just told me to get back in the car. We kept driving. For hours. Through rain. Through stretches of forest that looked too much like the one behind our old house. Finally, she pulled into a driveway lined with rusted metal sculptures and old wind chimes clanging against a breeze that didn't exist. An old woman stood on the porch, barefoot, wearing a black dress and a necklace made of bones that didn't look like they came from any animal I could name. "You brought the boy," the woman said without smiling. My mother nodded. "He needs to know." "Too late for knowing," the woman said. "He's been touched." Touched. The word hit like ice. They brought me inside without asking if I wanted to go. The house smelled of sage and earth and something underneath. something iron and bitter. The walls were covered in strange symbols carved directly into the wood. The windows were boarded up from the inside. The living room was filled with jars, each one holding something wrong. A finger, an eye, a tooth, all preserved in cloudy liquid. Labels written in a language I didn't understand. The woman, she called herself Mirtha, sat me down in front of a fire and tossed something into the flames that hissed and cracked like bone. Then she stared at me for a long time before finally speaking. "He's been following your sister since the lake took her," she said. "But she wasn't his first, and she won't be the last." "Who is he?" I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "He is the watcher beneath, the thing that waits in still water. He feeds on grief, on memory. Children are easiest, they forget. Then they remember. And when they remember, he comes back." "But why me?" I asked. "Why us?" "You didn't just forget your sister," she said. "You forgot what you did." I shook my head. "I didn't do anything. It was an accident." "No," she whispered. "It was a deal." The fire popped violently. My mother turned away. I felt the room closing in, my breath catching in my throat. "What do you mean, a deal?" "When you fell into the water, he gave you a choice," Mirtha said. "One of you would drown, one of you would live, and you chose." "No, I didn't." My voice cracked. "You don't remember making it," she continued. "But he does, and now he's coming to collect." A memory jolted through me like lightning, not an image, a feeling, cold, desperate. The water rising over my face, the darkness swallowing everything, and then something whispering in my ear. A voice not made for this world. "Choose." My chest tightened. "Can I stop him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "No," Mirtha said, standing, "but you can delay him, for a while." She handed me a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a charm, made of bone and twine, slick with something I didn't want to touch. "Keep it on you," she said. "Sleep with salt under your bed. Draw these symbols around your windows. Don't answer the humming. Don't look in mirrors after midnight. And never, ever, speak to her again." My mother and I stayed the night at Mirtha's, though I didn't sleep. I kept the charm clutched in my hand, whispering the words she'd taught me over and over. But the rules didn't hold. Because at exactly 3:07 a.m., I woke to find the charm gone, the salt circle broken, and the mirror on the wall was glowing. And from the other side of the glass, Elsie was watching, her mouth opened slowly, and for the first time I heard her speak a name. His name, not a name made of words, not something I could repeat without bleeding, but the moment I heard it, I understood. This wasn't about my guilt. It wasn't even about her. It was about him, and he had been waiting a long, long time. They say names have power. That to name a thing is to summon it, to bind it, or worse, to be seen by it. I used to think that was just superstition, the kind of thing you find in dusty books with yellow pages and cracked spines. But the moment Elsie spoke his name, if spoke is even the right word for it, something in the world cracked. It didn't come out of her mouth like normal speech. It spilled from the mirror like thick smoke and broken sound. It was less a word and more a feeling. Wet, heavy, wrong. It filled the room like water in a sinking ship. My ears blood, my vision blurred. My skin prickled with a cold that didn't come from any draft. The charm Mirtha gave me shattered on the floor with a sound that rang in my bones. And then the lights died. There was no flicker, no warning, just sudden suffocating black. I couldn't see her anymore, but I could feel her, close, closer than ever, and behind her him, breathing, watching. The watcher beneath. My voice caught in my throat. I tried to call for my mother, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't move. I was locked in place by fear or by something else. Something reaching through the dark, wrapping around my chest, my limbs, my spine. Then came the voice, his voice, if you could call it that. It didn't echo in the room. It echoed in my head, you remembered. The lights snapped back on, not slowly, not gradually, They just blinked on, like someone flipped a switch from the other side of the world. The mirror was shattered. My nose was bleeding, and my mother was screaming. She had burst into the room just as the lights returned. Her hands flew to my shoulders, shaking me, her voice a frenzy of panic and something deeper. Recognition. "He spoke to you, didn't he?" she cried over and over. "You heard him? You heard the name?" I nodded. That was all she needed to break. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor. I saw something in her then I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not grief, but surrender. Like she'd been holding something in for too long, and finally, it had slipped through her fingers. "I thought if we left, it would end," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I thought if you forgot, if I kept you away from water, from mirrors, from her, he'd never come back. What is he?" I asked, trembling. "What does he want from me?" My mother didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she rose shakily to her feet, went to her bag, and pulled out an old folder. It was faded, warped with moisture, and bound in twine. She placed it in my hands with the weight of a confession. "Your father tried to stop it," she said. "That's why he's gone." I blinked. "What?" "He knew about the Watcher. He didn't believe at first, but when you started sleepwalking, when you talked in your sleep, saying that song over and over again, he started digging. Found things. Things we weren't supposed to know. The folder was packed with clippings, photographs, handwritten notes, and something worse, sketches. Dozens of them, all the same shape. A tall figure, always standing just outside the frame, behind children, in the woods, in windows, in mirrors. The same crooked limbs, the same blank face, always watching. There was one photo that chilled me to the core. It was of me, age 6, sitting at the edge of Stillwater Lake. I was smiling. My sister was beside me, and in the reflection of the lake behind us, he stood. Unmistakable. My hands shook as I turned the pages. There were stories in there, handwritten accounts from other parents. Accounts of children vanishing after sleepwalking into lakes, rivers, even puddles. Some were found days later, eyes open, mouths full of water, lungs dry. Others were never found at all, just the humming, always the humming, left behind. "He feeds on memory," my mother said. "Grief binds him to this world. When people forget, he weakens. But when someone remembers, when they speak his name, it wakes him." I looked at her, heart pounding. "So what do we do now?" "We burn it," she said. "All of it." But even as she said the words, I knew it wouldn't work. You can burn paper. You can smash mirrors. You can throw away charms and salt and symbols. But you can't burn memory. Not once it's back inside you. Still, we tried. We burned the folder that night, every page, every photo. The ashes curled like dead leaves in the fireplace. But I didn't feel relief. I felt something stir. Something shift, somewhere far away, or maybe not far at all. He had noticed, and he was getting closer. We left Mirtha's the next morning, against her warning. She begged us to stay, said she could help keep him at bay. But my mother was done hiding. She wanted to confront it head on, whatever it was. Maybe she thought she could trade herself for me. Maybe she hoped she could bargain. But you can't bargain with something that doesn't speak your language. That day, we returned to Stillwater Lake. The shoreline hadn't changed. Still gray, still still, still wrong. The wind didn't move the trees, the birds didn't sing, and the lake, as always, looked more like a mirror than water. I didn't want to step out of the car. My feet refused to move. My body remembered what my mind had buried. The cold, the weight, the choice, but my mother did. She walked straight down to the water's edge. I followed at a distance, heart hammering. She pulled something from her coat, an old pendant, one my father used to wear. She held it tight, stared into the lake, and spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "We never meant to break the deal," she said. "You can have me. Just leave him." There was no response, no ripple, no sound, until the lake answered, not with words, with movement. The water began to swirl. slowly at first, then faster, a whirlpool forming at the center. I watched, frozen, as the water began to rise, not splash, not crash, but lift, shape, form, and there he was, tall, crooked, shifting between shapes, bones where there should be flesh, shadows where there should be eyes. His face bent toward my mother, and she dropped to her knees. "Take me," she begged. "Please." But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. That's when the screaming started. Elsie's voice, from everywhere at once, echoing out across the lake. Screaming my name. Not pleading. Not angry. Like my vision blurred. The ground tilted. My ears filled with that song again. That cursed lullaby, warped and slow, dragging me back through memories I didn't want, drowning all over again. And then, silence. When I woke, the lake was still. My mother was gone. No footprints. No splash. No body. Just the pendant, lying in the wet sand. I picked it up with trembling fingers. And when I turned around, I wasn't alone. Elsie stood at the tree line, smiling. "Now you know," she said, and she vanished. That night I checked into a motel alone. I didn't call the police. What would I say? That the lake took my mother. That my dead sister is walking the earth with something older than time. I stared at the mirror above the sink for a long time, daring it to move. It didn't. But I heard the humming. And this time, it was coming from inside me. The humming followed me home. Not back to Grayson Hollow. That place was gone to me now. No, I mean the real kind of home. The one you carry in your chest like a locked drawer. The hum lodged itself behind my eyes, in the gaps between heartbeats, inside every moment of silence. It waited until I thought I was safe, until the lights were on and the TV was buzzing and the motel clerk's voice was still ringing in my ears. Then it started again. Soft at first. Familiar. Like something I used to know but couldn't quite place. And worse, it didn't sound like Elsie anymore. It sounded like me. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the television. Some crime documentary played on low volume, flickering light across the walls. A detective recited facts about a killer no one ever caught. The irony wasn't lost on me. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing leaves against the window like long fingers. But even over all that noise, the humming crept through. I tried everything. Pillows over my ears, earplugs, music, white noise. It didn't matter. The tune wove its way through every layer of sound, every barrier. My own thoughts became infected by it, notes curling into my mind, words twisting to fit the rhythm. I started humming it without noticing, in the shower, while brushing my teeth, even while talking to myself. The worst part, I began to like it. It made me feel calm, comforted, like I was being watched, yes, but not by something hostile, by something familiar. Something that had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for me to notice. But that comfort was a lie, a trap, and it didn't take long to figure out what it wanted. That night, the mirrors started bleeding, not all at once, just the one above the bathroom sink. A slow drip at first, like condensation. Then a red line trickling down the middle, as if the glass itself had split open. I didn't touch it. I knew better. I just stared at my reflection, half expecting Elsie to appear again. She didn't. Instead, my reflection smiled. Not the me in the room. The other one. It smiled when I didn't. Tilted its head slowly, just like Elsie used to. Its eyes were too wide, too glassy, and it mouthed something I couldn't hear. I turned away. That was the first time I saw the shadows move. They didn't lurch or slither. They just shifted, like they had their own pulse. One in the corner. Another by the closet door. They stretched when I blinked, pulling toward me like a tide drawn to gravity. I packed a bag and left before dawn. No destination, just distance. I drove west until the sun rose and the gas tank begged for mercy. Found another motel, this one with peeling wallpaper and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. I liked that. People who didn't look too close. Who didn't want to know. But the humming was already there when I walked in. It wasn't in the walls. not in the air conditioning or the pipes. It was inside the room, as if the space remembered me, like it was waiting. I left the light on and sat by the door with my back to the wall. No mirrors. No windows open. I made sure the salt lines were drawn, just like Mirtha taught me. I even found another charm online, one of those so-called protection totems, and wore it around my neck even though it smelled like dead flowers. I told myself I would sleep. Of course I didn't. At 3:07 a.m., my phone vibrated. No caller ID. Just a single word on the screen, listen. And like an idiot I did. I held the phone to my ear. The humming poured through. But it wasn't music anymore. It was layered now. Voices behind voices. Children whispering, crying, gasping. Names spoken like curses. My name among them. And then hers, Elsie. And then his. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor, but the sound didn't stop. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the bed, the floor, everywhere. The room shook. The wallpaper peeled. The lights flickered once, then exploded. The room went dark, and he stepped through. Not from a door, not from a mirror, from the ceiling. Like he'd always been part of it, pressed against the plaster like a stain waiting to seep through. His limbs unfolded with sickening cracks, joints bending in ways bones weren't meant to. His face twisted into something almost human. Almost. But the worst part, the part that made me want to tear out my eyes, was his mouth. It wasn't a mouth at all. It was a scream made solid. A black, breathing hole that pulsed with every cry he'd ever eaten. And he was hungry. I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. I was frozen, same as every night before. But this time, he didn't just watch. He reached for me. A finger brushed my temple. It burned, not like fire, like drowning. My thoughts weren't mine anymore. I saw flashes, memories I'd never lived. Children pulled into lakes, hands reaching up, eyes wide open. Mothers clawing at ice. Fathers swinging axes into water that didn't ripple. And always him, always watching, feeding. I blacked out. When I woke, it was morning. The room was intact. The lights worked. The mirror was clean. The phone was on the table, no missed calls. For a moment, I thought maybe I dreamed it. But then I saw the scar, a small black mark on my temple. Like something had burned through the skin and left an impression. Like he'd signed me. I didn't stay long. By that point, I knew there were only two paths left. Either I ran forever, humming myself into madness, or I found a way to end it. Really end it. Not just for me. For Elsie. For the others. I went back to Mirtha. She was waiting. Her house looked smaller, grayer. The jars were gone. The symbols had been painted over, but not well. You could still see the outlines beneath. She opened the door before I knocked. "I warned you," she said. I didn't listen, I replied. "No," she said, "you did." That's what got his attention. I told her everything. About the name. The reflection. The mark. She didn't flinch. Just poured a cup of something bitter and hot and sat across from me. "You're marked now," she said. "He knows you. Knows where you are even when you don't." "How do I stop him?" "You don't," she said. "But you can send him back. For a while. What do I need to do?" Her eyes narrowed. "You have to finish what started at the lake." I didn't understand. She stood, rummaged through a drawer, and came back with a torn page from an old book. It was in a language I couldn't read, but the drawing chilled me to the bone. Two children, one above water, one below, and something in between holding them both. "You made a choice once," she said. "Now you have to unmake it." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "You have to go back," she said, "to the lake. To the exact spot. You have to call him. And then you have to choose again." "I don't understand." "You will," she said. That night, I stood by Stillwater Lake for the second time. The wind was dead. The trees bent low, as if eavesdropping. I walked to the edge, heart pounding. The humming started. I stepped into the water, and I whispered his name, and the lake opened its eyes. There are places in the world that feel dead even when they're alive. Fields that never bloom. Houses where no one laughs, lakes that don't ripple even when the wind screams across them. Stillwater Lake was one of those places, and when I stepped into it, barefoot, the water colder than ice, I realized something I hadn't understood before. It wasn't just a lake. It was a mouth. I could feel it breathing beneath me, not in the way water shifts naturally, but in slow, deliberate pulses. Inhales that made the mud underfoot flex, exhales that pulled tiny waves toward the center like it was hungry. I didn't know how far I had to go, only that I had to stand in the place where it happened, where I drowned, where Elsie never surfaced. The water rose to my knees, then my waist. I kept walking. The moon hovered above like a pale coin, casting the lake in silver. My breath clouded the air, though it was summer. The deeper I waded, the heavier everything became. My legs, my thoughts, even the silence. It was like the lake was pressing itself into me, inch by inch, memory by memory. And then I saw them, eyes beneath the surface, not one pair, dozens, hundreds, eyes of children. Wide, unblinking, glassy. Some looked panicked, others empty, all of them fixated on me. And then they moved, not up, not toward me, but around me, circling, waiting. I stopped. The lake was chest, deep now, the current non-existent, but the pressure unbearable. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm that hadn't hit yet. I whispered the name again, not out loud, but in my head, the way he seemed to prefer it. And instantly, the air changed. The surface began to ripple, slow and deliberate. The water around me warmed, something beneath my feet shifted, and then he rose, not fast, not with violence, with presence. The watcher beneath didn't erupt from the lake. He emerged like he had always been part of it, like the water had grown bones and skin and shadow just for him. He wasn't a man. He wasn't anything the world had language for. His arms were too many, his face half-formed, part void and part memory. One side smiled, the other bled, and his eyes, there were none. But he still saw. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I just stood there, locked in place as he towered over the surface, silent, unmoving. Then, a voice not his, but still from him, broke the silence. You came back? It was Elsie. I turned, heart pounding, and there she was, standing just outside the water's reach, dry, dressed in the same clothes she wore the day she died, her hair neatly braided, her face calm. You made a choice, she said. Now you have to make another. I didn't know, I said, my voice cracking. Yes, you did, she whispered. You just didn't want to remember. She stepped forward, one foot entering the water, and the watcher moved behind her like a shadow learning to walk. He wrapped a hand, if you could call it that, around her shoulder. Who stays this time? She asked. What? That's the deal. You came back. You called him. You offered yourself. But now he wants more. You or me. My knees buckled. The water pulled at my chest. I can't do that again. You already did, she said, and her voice wasn't accusing. It was factual, cold, like the lake. You chose to live. Now you choose who dies. The humming began again, not soft now. It echoed across the lake, from the trees, from beneath the surface. Every pair of eyes under the water blinked, once, slowly, in sync. You can take me, I said, tears stinging my face. I'll go. Let her go. Let her live. But the watcher didn't move. Elsie shook her head. You don't get to die, she said. Not yet. That would be too easy. You have to carry it. You have to remember. Behind her, the watcher opened his mouth. The scream poured out, not sound, but wind and memory and pain. I dropped to my knees in the water, gasping, every bone in my body vibrating like a struck bell. You chose, she said. You chose again. And then she stepped forward. The watcher's arms unfolded like wings. He wrapped her in them, and she didn't resist, didn't scream. She only looked at me, one last time, her eyes sad but certain. I never blamed you, she said. But he feeds on guilt. That's why he never leaves. And then she was gone. The lake stilled. The humming stopped. The sky lightened slightly, the moon dimming as though the world exhaled. And I was alone. I don't remember how I got back to shore. My body moved on its own, half conscious. When I collapsed on the grass, I vomited lake water and blood. My hands were shaking, my ears ringing. But I was alive, and I hated it. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't speak to anyone. I found another motel, deeper inland. No lakes, no mirrors, just static on the TV and flickering lights. I watched the sun rise every morning, convinced it wouldn't come. But it did, until the 13th night. That's when I woke up, the humming in my ears again. Only this time, it was louder than ever, and it was coming from inside the walls. The first time I heard the humming in the walls, it was distant, almost easy to dismiss, like faulty wiring or a dying appliance tucked deep behind the drywall. But I knew better. I recognized the tune. It had crawled its way into my dreams, poisoned the silence of every room I entered, and now it had moved closer. Much closer. It wasn't coming from the pipes or vents. It was inside the bones of the building. The motel was a hollow place. A washed-out, sun-starved relic from the 60s, hidden behind a dying diner off a 2-lane highway that hadn't seen traffic in years. The floor creaked even when no one walked. The lights flickered even when turned off. It was cheap, anonymous, and just isolated enough to feel safe, until that night. At 3:07 a.m., the humming began. Not soft, not subtle. Loud, rhythmic, and pressing against the drywall like breath. I sat bolt upright, drenched in sweat, and pressed my ear against the wall by instinct. The sound wasn't behind it. It was inside it. Like the building itself had learned the melody and was playing it on repeat. And then something moved. A bulge pushed out beneath the paint. Just a little, like the wall had taken a breath. Then another. Steady, deliberate inhales like lungs expanding behind thin plaster. I stumbled back, heart hammering, suddenly aware of every beat as a countdown. Something was waking up. I turned on every light, blasted the television to drown it out, but the humming only grew louder. It shifted keys, moving from a child's lullaby into something darker, deeper, no longer meant to soothe, but to summon. The wallpaper began to peel. At first, just a corner curling upward, then strips torn down by an invisible hand, revealing black marks underneath. Symbols, ones I'd seen before, on Mirtha's walls, in the ruined notes my mother tried to burn. But these weren't just drawn. They were carved, etched deep into the wooden frame of the building, like the motel had once been a different place, a place that knew the watcher beneath. I backed into the bathroom, flicked the light on, and that's when I saw her again. Elsie, but not as she was, as she might have been. She stood in the mirror, older now, maybe 16. Her hair longer, her eyes no longer wide with innocence, but narrowed, focused. She looked like someone who had lived inside nightmares and learned to shape them. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She only watched, hand pressed against the glass, and then her mouth moved. 3 words. He's still hungry. The mirror cracked from the center out. A low groan came from behind me, no longer the humming. Something heavier, a weight dragging across wood. I turned just in time to see the floorboards between the beds shift. Not pop, not crack. Shift, like something underneath was pushing upward, trying to get in, or out. I ran. No keys, no bag. Just barefoot down the hall and out into the cold night air. Gravel tore at my feet, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back until I hit the road and realized the motel, every room, had lights on. Not just the usual yellow glow, red, pulsing, like veins lit from within. And all the windows were full of faces, not guests, not people. Children, dozens of them, pressed against the glass, eyes wide, mouths humming. I didn't scream. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. When I finally collapsed in a ditch a mile down the road, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Morning. But it didn't feel like salvation. Nothing did anymore. I stayed off the grid after that, abandoned the car, burned the phone. I moved by foot, hitchhiking with truckers who didn't ask questions, and slept in churches when they'd let me. Every night, I drew salt lines. Every night, I muttered Mirtha's warnings like a broken prayer. Every night, I hummed under my breath without realizing it. I was unraveling. But worse, I wasn't alone in it, because I began to notice things. Children staring at me in diners, murmuring the tune into half-empty juice boxes, mirrors that clouded as I passed, streetlights flickering out above me, one by one. Everywhere I went, something followed. Not him, not yet, but her, Elsie. She appeared in reflections, in windows, in puddles, always older, always changing. Once I even saw her standing among a crowd at a mall, wearing a hoodie, hood up, hair covering her face. But when she turned toward me, there was no face at all, just an open mouth humming that cursed tune. I collapsed in a stall that night, sobbing, whispering apologies to a sister I couldn't bury and a monster I couldn't unsee. But on the 14th night after the lake, something changed. The humming stopped. I waited for it, bracing myself at 3:07 a.m., but nothing came. No shadows, no whispers, no flickering lights, just silence. I didn't trust it. Silence from the watcher wasn't peace. It was a setup, and I was right, because that morning I received a package at a bus depot. No name on it, no return address. Inside, an old Polaroid, a photo of me, taken from behind, at the lake, my arm outstretched toward someone just out of frame, and in the corner, barely visible, carved into the bark of a tree behind me, the same symbols from the motel. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Tucked behind the photo, folded in half, was a sheet of paper, a printout, from a missing persons database. The headline read, "Boy missing from shelter near Grayson Hollow, last seen humming." And the photo of the missing boy, he looked just like me. Not similar, identical, down to the scar on his temple. I dropped the paper, hands shaking, unable to breathe. It wasn't just me he was feeding on anymore. He was copying me, spreading me, multiplying the memory. That's when I realized the watcher beneath doesn't kill you. He remakes you. And the more people who remember, the more versions of you there are to feed. The world fractures in small, almost invisible ways. At first, it's the subtle ones, the strange glances from strangers, the sense that someone across the street knows your name, the feeling of déjà vu that lingers too long. But when I saw that boy's picture, the one who had vanished from the shelter near Grayson Hollow, with my exact face, my scar, my eyes, I stopped believing I was just haunted. This wasn't about guilt anymore. This was replication. He was making more of me. I couldn't stop looking at the photo. It was me. Not metaphorically. Not looks like me, it was me. Same hair. Same crooked jawline. Same expression I saw every morning in cracked motel mirrors. The file said his name was Eli, 12 years old. Last seen walking away from the dining hall at a youth shelter, singing quietly to himself. That detail lodged itself in my skull like a splinter. Singing, humming. The police report mentioned no struggle, no signs of force. Just one moment he was there, the next he wasn't. But then came the part that made my stomach drop. Witnesses claim the boy began acting strangely the week prior to his disappearance, often talking about someone named Elsie and refusing to sleep near water. I sat in the corner of the bus terminal, surrounded by people but completely alone. My skin crawled like something beneath it wanted out. My throat was dry and tight. I could still hear the humming, faint now, receding, but I knew it would come back. Louder, closer, always closer. The watcher had changed tactics. He wasn't just feeding, he was growing. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I stopped going indoors, slept under bridges, in alleys, in fields. Wherever I could see the sky, where no walls could hum or breathe or peel away. But no matter how far I wandered, the signs followed me. Missing children. Some looked like me, some didn't, but every single one of them had a detail in common. Disappearances near water, eyes wide open when last seen, and some mention of a tune, a girl, or a figure described as tall and crooked. I began to collect their names. Daniel, Marcus, Lily, Juno, Caleb. Some were teenagers, some were toddlers, But all of them, every last one, disappeared under the same impossible circumstances. The deeper I dug, the more patterns I found. The towns were spread apart, yet each formed a ring around Grayson Hollow, as if everything began at the center and was spiraling outward. At the dead center of it all, Stillwater Lake, the mouth. But there was something else, something worse. Not every child disappeared. Some came back, but they weren't right. A 7-year-old girl named Alina reappeared 3 days after she vanished during a family camping trip near Black Hollow Creek. Her mother swore she'd seen her slip beneath the water. Rescue divers found nothing, and then, without warning, she was back. Dry, clean, eyes wide, smiling. She didn't speak for weeks, and when she finally did, the only thing she said was, "He gave me new skin." I visited Alina's town, pretended to be a freelance journalist working on a story about missing children. Her aunt agreed to meet me in a diner just off the highway. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. When I asked her about the girl's return, she didn't blink. "That's not my niece," she said. "Not anymore." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I already knew. The Watcher wasn't taking children to consume them. He was taking them to remake them. Skin, face, memory, all rewritten, and not just once. He could do it over and over. One memory multiplied, scattered across bodies like plague, like a virus made of thought. That's what he wanted from me. Not death, continuity. Every time I remembered, he grew. Every time I thought of Elsie, or the lake, or the humming, I was fueling him, feeding him. That's why he didn't kill me. That's why he made me choose. That's why he let me live. Because I was the seed. And I was starting to split. The signs started to show in my body first. I woke one morning with dirt under my fingernails and mud on my feet. But I hadn't moved all night. Then the mark on my temple began to ache. Not a sharp pain, more like a slow, knowing pressure. As if something beneath the skin was pushing outward, eager to be seen. I caught my reflection in a window and nearly screamed. For just a second, it wasn't my face, it was hers, Elsie, but older. Her eyes peering through mine like a parasite testing its new host. Then she blinked. Once. And the reflection was mine again. I fled. I tried to isolate myself. Took buses to nowhere towns. Stayed off main roads. Burned every document with my name on it. But it didn't matter. I started hearing my own voice in places I hadn't been. A gas station clerk told me I'd already passed through the day before. A motel owner said I'd checked in under a different name last week. I asked for security footage. He said the camera didn't work, but he remembered the eyes. "You didn't blink," he told me. Not once the entire time. It wasn't me. Not really. It was another version, another replica. Somehow, he was peeling pieces of me off and sending them out into the world like spores, like bait, like warnings. I had to stop it. But there was no way to kill something like the Watcher. Fire, salt, silence. None of it worked. Not forever. He lived in the remembering. He fed on the grief. The only way to cut him off was to erase the memory itself. Elsie. Stillwater. The choice. All of it. But how do you forget the thing that defines your life? How do you cut out the rot when it's grown around your bones? I didn't know. So I did the only thing left. I went back to the lake, one last time. Not to fight, not to call him, not to make another deal. I went back to bury myself, to find the spot where I drowned, to sink back into it, to give him the memory and let him rot with it. I stood at the edge again, same shoreline, same crooked tree, same smell, wet moss and silence. I waded in. The water was warmer this time, eager. It rose past my knees, my waist, my chest. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Take it back." And then I let go. I stopped fighting the memory. I welcomed it. Every second. The scream. The cold. Her hand slipping from mine. The darkness closing in. I pulled it close, tighter than I ever had. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt truth. I didn't choose to live. He chose me. And that meant he could choose again. The water pulled me under. and the humming stopped. Drowning doesn't feel like the movies say it does. There's no thrashing, no desperate clawing at the sky. Not when it's real. Not when you're ready. The water was warm as it closed over me, as if it recognized me, as if I belonged to it. And maybe I did. Maybe I always had. I didn't struggle. I didn't gasp. I let it take me. But I didn't die. I sank. Deeper than I should have. Past what the lake could physically hold. Past logic. Past breath. The world turned dark. And then darker still, until I wasn't sinking through water anymore. I was falling through silence. A kind of thick, pressing nothing that tasted like copper and rot and grief. My limbs moved without resistance, as though weightless, as though I were floating in something far thicker than water. And then I landed. Not with a splash, but with a thud, on ground. Solid. I blinked. There was light, but it wasn't coming from above. It pulsed from cracks in the earth, dull and reddish, like veins of magma beneath bruised skin. The sky, if you could call it that, was black and low and curved inward, as though the lake had folded itself into a dome around me. And the air buzzed with a sound I felt more than heard. Humming. Low. Endless. A choir of children humming in unison. Not the same lullaby as before. This was deeper. Slower, like mourning. Or a summoning. I stood, feet bare on slick stone like mud, and saw the figures. Hundreds of them. Children. Some whole, some not. Their faces blurred as if memory itself had started to erode them. Some hummed with eyes closed. Others swayed. A few simply stared forward, faces empty, waiting. They surrounded a structure. No, not a structure. A shape. At the center of it all was him, the watcher beneath. Not tall anymore. Not looming. Massive. His body was fused to the ground, stretched across it like roots, limbs twisted and embedded into the surface. His many faces shifted constantly. Children's faces, adult faces, Elsie's face, mine, all morphing, melting into each other. They breathed, they blinked, they hummed. And in the middle of his chest, where a heart should be, there was a door. A small, rotted wooden door, no bigger than a child's closet. It looked wildly out of place, ordinary. But it pulsed with the same reddish glow as the cracks in the earth. I walked toward it, drawn by instinct, or command. I don't know which. The children didn't move to stop me. They only watched. When I reached the door, I heard her. Elsie, whispering from inside. Don't open it. I froze. My hand was already on the handle. You're not ready, she said. You're still too full. Full of what? I whispered. You. The door shuddered beneath my fingers. Behind me, the watcher shifted. The faces turned toward me, and for a split second, they all smiled. If you open it like this, Elsie warned, her voice urgent, he'll use you, like he used me, like he's using all of us. You'll become the memory, not the end of it. I let go of the handle. Everything in me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Only deeper, only forward. I looked at the watcher's endless limbs, stretching into the black distance. He wasn't a being. He was a place. A system. A cycle. Every memory he fed on, every child who remembered, every humming voice. It all fed this shape, kept it alive, kept it growing. He wasn't a monster. He was a machine made of loss, stitched together with trauma, powered by the need to hold on to the pain. I stepped back from the door, and the humming stopped. All the children turned to face me. The air pulsed, and Elsie appeared. Not in the door, not beside the watcher. In front of me, alive, whole, not as she was in the mirror or in dreams, but as she might have been if the lake hadn't taken her. 16, like the version I'd seen before. But this time, she was real. Solid. Breathing. I've been waiting for you, she said softly. I thought you were gone. I was, she said. But not all the way. Pieces of me stayed behind. In you. In him. In the choice, she walked toward me, barefoot, not disturbing the ground. The other children watched us like statues, unblinking. You were right at the lake, I said. I didn't make the choice. He made it, she nodded. But now you can unmake it. I looked at the door again. I don't understand. What's behind it? The root of him, she said. Where it began. Before the lake. Before us. It's not a place. It's a moment. A wound. He lives in that wound. And if I open it, you'll see it. But if you're not ready, you'll feed it instead of stopping it. Then how do I get ready? Elsie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a shard of mirror. This is what's left of me, she said. What I was before he took me. Before I forgot myself. She pressed it into my hand. It was warm. It pulsed like a heartbeat. You have to do what no one else has done, she said. You have to forgive yourself. My throat tightened. How? Mean it, she said. The humming started again. But this time it wasn't coming from the watcher. It was coming from me. Low at first, then louder. A sound I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying, like air I hadn't breathed out since the lake. It rose in my throat, not forced, not deliberate. A memory aching to be sung. The faces began to turn, one by one. The children started humming with me. Not the old melody. A new one. Softer, lighter. The watcher shuddered. Cracks formed along his limbs. His faces stopped shifting. They froze in place, mouths hanging open. The door in his chest began to creak. Elsie smiled. You're almost there. I closed my eyes. I forgive myself, I said. The shard of mirror glowed hot in my palm. I didn't choose to live, I said. I just didn't know how to die. The shard dissolved. Elsie reached for my hand. Now open it. I turned to the door. The wood no longer pulsed red. It was gray now, soft, almost crumbling. I grasped the handle and pulled. It opened without a sound. And what I saw inside wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a hellscape, or a void, or a monster. It was a room. A small, dusty bedroom. A child's room. Toys on the floor. A nightlight in the corner. And on the bed, a boy, curled up, crying. He looked just like me, but younger, 6. And beside the bed stood a tall, crooked figure, watching. Not moving, just watching, and humming. I stepped into the room, the air turning thick. The boy didn't notice me, but the watcher did. Slowly, his faceless head turned toward me. He didn't hiss, didn't attack, just stared. I walked past him, sat on the bed, put my hand on the child's back, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." The boy turned his face toward me. Tears streaked his cheeks. "Is she mad at me?" he asked. "No," I said. "She never was." He nodded once, and vanished. The watcher crumbled. The walls of the room splintered. The floor fell away, and I was rising, fast, spinning, pulled through light and dark and sound, until everything shattered. And I woke up on the shore of Stillwater Lake. Alone, dry, breathing. The sun was rising, and the humming was gone. Stillwater Lake was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deeper than silence. Like the earth itself is holding its breath. I lay on the shore with my palms pressed into the cold dirt, chest rising and falling slowly, steadily, alive. The sun crept through the trees, lighting the mist that hovered above the water like a ghost reluctant to leave. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no humming, no shadows in the corners of my vision, no pressure behind my eyes. The absence was so total, so unfamiliar, that I didn't trust it. I sat up and waited. Nothing moved. Not the trees. Not the water. Not the thing that used to live beneath it. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see the mark still burned into my temple, but my skin was smooth. No scar, no sign, like he had never touched me, like I had never been part of him. My first thought was that maybe it had worked. That maybe opening the door, facing the memory, forgiving myself. Maybe that had done what nothing else could. Maybe I had closed the wound he fed from. Maybe, finally, he was gone. But the word maybe held too much weight. I walked back to town on foot, unsure if the car we'd driven here months ago still existed. The forest around me didn't whisper anymore. It didn't watch. It felt like any other forest, just dirt and trees and wind. Still, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, expecting to see Elsie's silhouette between the trunks, barefoot and humming, eyes unblinking. But she didn't come. When I reached Grayson Hollow, Something was different. It was awake. Not in the supernatural way it had been before. Not the flickering streetlights, or the people who didn't blink, or the houses with shadows that breathed. It was normal. Children played in yards. Stores were open. Music drifted from an open window. It was almost insulting how ordinary everything looked. How untouched. Like nothing had ever happened. Like no children had vanished. Like the watcher beneath had never lived at all. I stood in front of our old house, staring at the porch where my mother once drank coffee and tried to hide her exhaustion behind polite smiles. The house was for sale. The windows were clean. The grass had been cut. And in the upper window, my old bedroom, I saw a boy watching me. Not me. Not another version. A stranger. But he looked safe. Whatever had lived here before, whatever had poisoned these walls was gone. Still, I didn't go in. Some things don't need to be revisited. Instead, I walked to the library. It had been closed the last time I was here. The windows blacked out, the interior swallowed by something invisible. Now, the lights were on. The door opened with a soft chime. The librarian smiled at me like she didn't recognize my face. That was a relief. The last time I stood here, the shelves whispered and the books bled. I headed straight for the archives. I needed to know. If he was truly gone, the signs would fade. The past would return to what it was before. Memory would become just memory, not a door, not a weight. Just fragments of time. But something strange happened. I searched for records of the missing children. The files I once found so easily. Newspaper clippings, police reports, handwritten letters from desperate parents. All of it gone. Not removed. Not locked away. Erased. There were no files on the boy who looked like me. No mention of Eerie or Alina or any of the names I had collected. It was as if their disappearances had never happened. Even my sister, there was no death record, no missing person report, no obituary. Only one line buried in a decades-old census: Ilse Monroe, age 16, enrolled, Stillwater High School. I sat back in the wooden chair, blood roaring in my ears. 16, alive, enrolled. I ran from the library, heart pounding. Made my way across town to the school, barely noticing the people I passed. I couldn't let myself hope, not yet. Hope was dangerous. It invited disappointment. But I had to know. The front office smelled of lemon cleaner and paper. A woman sat behind the desk, peering at me over reading glasses. "Can I help you?" My throat was dry. "I'm looking for a student," I said. "Elsie Monroe." She typed the name, then smiled. "Yes, she's in the art room, I believe." "You're welcome to wait outside. Visitors aren't allowed past the front until we call them down." I nodded slowly and stepped outside, sat on the concrete bench, waited, and then the door opened, and she stepped out. My sister, not the ghost, not the reflection, not the haunted girl in a mirror, a real girl, alive, breathing, 16. She had paint on her hands and a sketchbook under one arm. Her hair was longer than I remembered, her face older, her eyes still hers. She stopped when she saw me, tilted her head, the way she always used to when trying to place a memory. "Do I know you?" she asked. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. She frowned slightly. "Are you okay?" My mouth finally worked. "I used to be your brother," I said. She blinked. Her frown deepened. "Used to be? I think you're free now," I said. She watched me for a long moment. "Should I know what that means?" "No," I whispered. "That's the point." She gave a small, confused smile, then stepped past me and down the sidewalk, humming softly to herself. Not the old song, a new one. I sat there for hours after she left, letting it settle in. The world had restructured itself. Reality had healed. The watcher's root, the moment, the wound, it had closed. And with it, so had everything he fed on. Elsie had never drowned. The deal had never been made. I had never been marked. I was a stranger now. A remnant from a version of time that had collapsed in on itself. And I was the only one who remembered. That night, I left Grayson Hollow for good. Didn't take anything with me. Didn't leave anything behind. I walked until the roads gave way to dirt, until the houses thinned, until the stars came out. They looked different somehow, brighter. I never saw the watcher again. But sometimes, when I pass a mirror late at night, I pause, just long enough to be sure. And I don't hum. I never hum. Because silence, real silence, is the only thing that keeps him asleep. I told myself I was done, that it was over, that whatever had held the world in its cold grip had released it, and I could finally exhale without fearing what might creep in on the breath. I believed that for a while. Not because it felt true, but because I needed it to be. I needed to believe that walking away from Grayson Hollow meant walking away from the Watcher. From Elsie's death, that wasn't. From the broken timeline that had nearly swallowed me. But time has a way of circling back, especially when you're the only one who remembers the path it once took. It started again on a bus. Middle of nowhere, empty fields outside the window. Evening light stretching long and gold across the dirt. I was headed west. No destination, just distance. The bus was half full, strangers lost in books, headphones, exhaustion. And then I heard it, faint. 2 rows back, a child humming. Not the tune, a new one, softer, slower. But the way it slid through the air, the way it settled in the space between heartbeats, it felt wrong. I didn't turn around, not at first. I closed my eyes and counted slowly. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe it was just a lullaby from some tired parent's playlist. But when I finally glanced over my shoulder, I saw him, a boy, maybe 10. Pale, thin, sitting alone, staring directly at me. And he wasn't blinking. I froze. The humming stopped. The bus hit a pothole, jarring everyone in their seats. But the boy didn't move. Not a flinch, not a breath, just eyes locked onto mine. And then he smiled. Not wide, not manic. Just enough to let me know he knew. I didn't confront him. I got off at the next stop, somewhere I'd never been. The kind of place with more rust than pavement. The air smelled of dry weeds and old rain. I ducked into a gas station and watched the bus disappear down the highway, the boy's face still pressed against the window, still watching me. My stomach turned. I hadn't just survived the Watcher. I had become marked by the memory of him, and the scar I thought had vanished. It came back. That night, I found a mirror in a motel bathroom. Small, cracked, just enough to catch my reflection in pieces. And there it was, barely visible beneath the skin at my temple, but real. A shadow that didn't belong. A tremble in the glass when I moved too fast. The way my eyes lingered just a second too long after I'd looked away. He wasn't dead. He was dormant. And I was still the host. Whatever I had done at the lake, whatever door I'd opened, whatever forgiveness I'd whispered to the child in the bed, I hadn't ended it. I had contained it. And cracks were forming in the walls. It wasn't just the boy on the bus. A week later, I found a flyer stapled to a telephone pole outside a thrift store. Faded photo, missing child. No date, no contact number, just the name Juno. I knew that name. She'd been one of the vanished, from the first wave. A girl who disappeared near a river bend, just outside of Marlow Creek. I had found her name in the police reports back when the pattern had begun to reveal itself. But she had been erased with the rest of them. Now she was back. Still missing, still humming. Someone had remembered. That's how it worked. He didn't need everyone to remember. Just one. Just one open wound. One whispered tune. One flicker of guilt. And the spiral would begin again. I found an old payphone and called the only person who might still understand, Mirtha. The number I had for her didn't work anymore. Disconnected. So I went back to where she'd lived. The road was overgrown. Her house was empty, burned halfway to the foundation. Blackened beams rising from the ground like fingers clawing at the sky. No caution tape. No news articles online. Nothing. No record she'd ever been there. But someone had carved something into the scorched doorframe. A symbol. The same one I'd seen in the motel wall months ago. The one etched into the Watcher's limbs. And underneath, in a scrawl so faint I nearly missed it, he sleeps, but memory stirs. I stood there for hours, watching the horizon, wondering if Mirtha had tried to stop him one final time and paid the price. Or worse, if she hadn't failed at all, but had become part of him, absorbed, as so many others had been, into the network of memory that held him in place. The world moved on. Children played. The sun shone. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension building. Like a storm that hadn't yet breached the clouds. Like something waiting for the next name to be spoken. The next lullaby hummed in the dark. I knew then what had to be done. It wasn't enough to contain him. He had to be starved. No memory, no song, no names, nothing to cling to, which meant I had to disappear completely. Erase myself, not physically, historically, wipe every mention, every trace, every piece of the story, my name, my face, my connection to still water, to Elsie, to the Watcher. Burn it all, because if no one remembered me, there would be nothing left for him to crawl back into. But before I vanished, I needed to leave one message behind. Just one, for the next me. Because something deep inside me knew I wasn't the first to try this. And I wouldn't be the last. I wrote the message by hand, not because I didn't trust digital ink, though I didn't, but because I needed it to feel real, etched in something fragile, something personal. Paper remembers better than screens. It absorbs, it holds, it stains. I found an old notebook in a thrift store, yellowed at the edges, the spine half torn. Perfect. I wrote in pen, no edits, no rewrites. Every word came like blood squeezed from an old wound. It began like this: if you're reading this, then you remember. And if you remember, it means it's starting again. I didn't sign my name. That was rule 1. Erase the name. It's the first foothold he finds. Names are anchors, and the Watcher only needs a thread. Even my handwriting felt dangerous, too familiar, too traceable. But I couldn't stop writing. I had to pass it on, not the curse, the truth. There was a girl named Elsie once, and she died. Only she didn't. Only she did. It depends which version of the story you're living in. But she was mine, and I let go of her, and the lake took her. The words trembled on the page. My hands weren't shaking. I was. Not the body. The memory. I could feel it stirring again, like something just beneath the surface of a frozen pond. Cracking upward. He lives in memory. That's all he needs. That's all he's ever needed. You don't have to speak his name. You don't have to say the song. You just have to wonder, did I forget something? And he finds you. I paused. That was always the moment. The trapdoor thought. The harmless flicker of doubt. Did I forget something? That's when he slips in. Through the doubt. Through the guilt. Through the crack in the memory where a face should be but isn't. That's how it starts. I continued. He took children at first. The innocent. The ones closest to grief. But innocence fades and hunger grows. He started copying. Making versions. Children with someone else's face. Places with someone else's memories. The lake isn't the only lake anymore. I underlined that last sentence. You'll think you're safe because you don't live near still water. You're not. He learned to echo. He can hum through bathtubs, puddles, fish tanks. If it holds reflection and silence long enough, it becomes a doorway. I closed the notebook then and stared at it for a long time. One part of me wanted to burn it right there, to drop it in the motel's rusted trash, can light a match and watch the words curl into ash. But that would defeat the point. This wasn't a warning for the world. It was a breadcrumb for the version of me that would eventually come back, because I knew this wasn't over. I'd starve him for now, erase myself, strip every record, every fingerprint. But memory is elastic. It snaps back eventually. And when it does, someone will need to remember why. I buried the notebook in a cemetery 2 towns away. No names on the graves. Just the kind of stone markers left behind when no family comes to claim the dead. I tucked it inside a rusted toolbox beneath the roots of a tree split by lightning long ago. deep enough to be forgotten, shallow enough to be found. Then I went to work. I destroyed everything that tied me to the timeline he fed from. Social security records, school transcripts, medical files. I paid in cash, slept in alleys, wore borrowed names and thrifted faces. Every town I passed through was a blur of fogged windows and silent exits. I stopped answering to anything. Even in my own mind, I tried to dull the syllables of my name, let them fade like old radio static. But even as I vanished, I knew he could still smell me. Memory doesn't die, it decays. It grows quieter, but it never shuts up, and I could still hear it. Not the humming, something worse. A new silence, one that stretched too long, too wide, like the hush before a scream. That's when I realized he wasn't chasing me anymore. He was waiting for someone else to remember. And they would. Someone always does. It's human nature to revisit pain, to prod at scars, to say what really happened that day. That's the moment he thrives on. That's the bite. But maybe, just maybe, if someone finds the notebook, if they find it early enough, before the humming returns, before the reflections flicker, before the face in the mirror starts to change, maybe they can walk away. Maybe they won't pick at the memory. Maybe they'll turn the page and choose not to read. That's the hope. The only one I have left. So if you're reading this, close the book. Burn it. Forget her name. Forget mine. Forget the lake. Because the second you remember, he'll remember you. Hope is a brittle thing. I thought burying the notebook, cutting myself loose from every traceable thread, would end it. Not for the world, maybe, but for me. For the part of me that had been stretched too thin across too many nights, too many mirror glances, too many unfinished lullabies. But hope bends, and if you don't burn it, it waits for someone else to pick it up. Someone always does. It started with a headline. Local teen claims to see missing sister in reflections. I saw it in a cafe 2 towns over. The TV was muted, but the banner rolled quietly across the bottom of the screen. Most people missed it. I didn't. I left my coffee untouched and walked straight out into the rain, heart pounding, bile rising. A week later, another article. Children missing in Fairgate County. Authorities investigating unusual circumstances. They were calling it a coincidence. 2 disappearances in the same week, both kids under 10. One vanished from a public pool. The other disappeared from a daycare while sitting in front of a fish tank. No signs of forced entry. No camera footage. Just gone. But I knew the signs. Still, I didn't interfere. I told myself I was a ghost now. I wasn't allowed to meddle. I had erased my presence from the world so he wouldn't follow. But ghosts don't stop watching. I followed the trail from a distance, like a shadow behind the shadow. It wasn't just the vanishings. People were humming again. I'd pass them on the street, teenagers, shopkeepers, kids tugging at their parents' hands, and sometimes, just for a second, I'd catch the tail end of a tune. Not the one I remembered. Not exactly. A mutation. Slower. New, but rooted in the same place, the wound. It wasn't just me anymore. Others remembered. And some of them had stories that didn't belong to them. A girl in a high school journal club wrote a short story about a lake that swallowed children whole and gave them back with someone else's eyes. Her teacher reported her because she screamed when asked to read it aloud. A boy in a halfway house carved strange symbols into the wall of his room and claimed he was trying to keep the crooked man in the mirror from stepping out. When asked where he learned it, he said his brother taught him. His brother drowned when he was 5. He never had a brother. The memories were spreading, and not just resurfacing. They were replicating, leaping from mind to mind, changing shape, grafting themselves into innocent people, rewriting their pasts like pages in a shared nightmare. And I knew, with a sickness I couldn't unfeel, that my erasure hadn't stopped the watcher. It had given him more room. When I removed myself from the board, he didn't disappear. He adapted. He found new hosts. New minds to nest inside, new stories, and worst of all, new names. I had believed, once, that his name was a fixed thing, that the forbidden word, the one Elsie whispered through the mirror, was the key to his return. But I'd misunderstood. That name wasn't his. It was mine. The deal at the lake, the door in his chest, the child on the bed. It wasn't about him. It was about me. I had been the tether, the memory he clung to, the echo he grew from. And now that echo had fractured. He didn't need a single name anymore. He just needed someone to remember enough. A face, a melody, a feeling. I saw myself again in a gas station security mirror. Not my reflection, me, standing outside the glass, watching. Same clothes, same scar, same everything. But I wasn't there. I ran out into the parking lot, heart thundering, eyes scanning every face. But no one turned, no one stared. The doppelganger was gone. That's when it hit me. I had erased myself from the world, but not from him. He still had the blueprint, the bones of my guilt. He didn't need me alive anymore, just duplicated, spread thin across the minds of others, like mold in the walls. I had become a memory virus. I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his origin. And if I didn't find the source of the replication, if I didn't sever it at the root, he would become permanent. Not just a ghost in the mirror, not just a song behind the silence. He would become common knowledge, something people joked about at sleepovers, something urban legends whispered on Reddit threads and clickbait articles, something that children would draw in chalk on playgrounds. And once he was known, really known, he'd never sleep again. He'd grow into culture, into the air, into the fabric of how we understand fear. And there'd be no pulling him back. So I went looking for the cracks. I followed every false memory, every child humming, every person who described a reflection that smiled back wrong. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I stopped thinking of myself as human and started thinking of myself as a firewall. I traced the web of contamination and found the epicenter. A small, grim podcast run by a college dropout named Jonah Hart, called Reflections, the Horror We Forget. He thought it was fiction. He thought he'd invented it. A story about a lake that whispers. A crooked man who watches from the water. A tune that steals your name. It had thousands of listeners, millions of downloads. I sat in the back of a cafe as he recorded a live episode, sipping his drink and talking into his mic like nothing mattered. Like he hadn't just resurrected the thing we fought so hard to bury. Like he hadn't handed him a megaphone. And when he told his listeners to send in your dreams, my blood went cold, because dreams are just memories in disguise. And he was inviting them in, not the listeners, the watcher. I waited until he was alone in his car. I tapped on the window. He jumped. I told him we needed to talk. I told him his story wasn't fiction. And then I told him what would happen if he didn't stop. He laughed at first. Then he looked in the rearview mirror and saw himself smiling. But it wasn't him. And it never blinked. Jonah didn't scream. That part surprised me. Most people, when confronted with something impossible, with a version of themselves that doesn't blink and smiles like skin, has never fit quite right, they collapse. They deny. They run. But not Jonah. He stared into the mirror like he was waiting for it to move again, for it to wink or step out. He whispered, "That's not me," and I said, "Not yet." He didn't ask who I was or how I knew. He asked one question: how many people has it copied? I didn't have an answer, not a real one. But I told him what I'd seen. Reflections smiling when faces were still, children humming songs their parents had never taught them, names that appeared in documents and files and dreams without ever having belonged to a person. I told him how the watcher no longer needed a host to survive. He needed belief, exposure, echo. I told him how stories become scaffolding, how enough retellings turn shadows into structures, and how his podcast had become a blueprint. "You think I made him stronger?" he asked. "No," I said. "You made him visible." That shook him. Because deep down, I think Jonah wanted the story to be real. People like him, storytellers, they hunt monsters, not knowing they're just excavating graves. He didn't create the Watcher. He uncovered him. And then, like a curious archaeologist with no gloves, he pulled the bones into the sun and handed them to the world like a gift. Now he was trying to shove them back into the dirt. But it was too late, because Jonah had done more than speak the story. He'd worn it. He didn't know it yet, but I could see it. The way he blinked less than normal, the way his shadow lagged half a breath behind his movements. Small things, tells, early symptoms. He wasn't possessed. Not exactly. He was fracturing. And the Watcher had found the perfect host. A storyteller with an audience. The modern priest. He hadn't seen the other versions of himself yet. The copies I had. In parking lots. In crowds. Watching from mirrors or reflections in store windows. They didn't follow. They waited. Each with a piece of him. Each with a part of the song. Each more refined, more real than the last. He was being rebuilt from the outside in. And when the last piece slotted into place, there'd be no stopping the transition. He would cease to be Jonah. He would become Legion. Not many souls. Many memories. One figure. All doors open. All eyes watching. I told him that, quietly, calmly. Like I was breaking bad news to someone in a hospital room. I thought he'd panic. But Jonah just nodded and said, "Then I need to see the lake." "No," I said. "That's exactly what it wants." "Don't care," he said. "If it's rewriting me, then I want to meet the author." We argued. I told him about the others. About Elsie. About the door in the chest. About the hundreds of children still stuck humming in places no longer real. I told him he'd never come back the same. That the lake rewrites you even if you survive. He didn't listen. So I made him a deal. I'd take him to Stillwater Lake. But if I saw him blink twice with the same delay I'd seen in the others, if his reflection so much as twitched out of sync, I'd end it. He didn't laugh. He just said fair. We drove in silence. The trees leaned inward the closer we got. The road narrowed. The air thickened. My hand stayed clenched on the wheel. Jonah stared out the window, humming under his breath. Not the tune, but something close. Something new, maybe. Stillwater looked the same as always, innocent, motionless, bottomless. The air buzzed with the kind of silence that hums inside your ears when you're standing too close to something that's supposed to be buried. We stood at the edge. Jonah took a step forward. I held his arm. "Do not touch the water," I said. He didn't argue. He just stared. And then he said, "Why is it reflecting the sky when it's cloudy?" I turned. He was right. The lake shimmered with a blue too perfect, too still, like a photograph taped over something rotten. And then I realized it wasn't a reflection. It was a window. And on the other side of that window, he was watching. The Watcher beneath. Jonah took another step. I shouted, "Too late." He reached out, just his fingers, just to test the water. It grabbed him. Not the lake, the memory. His body didn't move, but his eyes rolled back. And then he smiled. I pulled him away, slapped him, shouted his name. He blinked once, twice, perfectly out of sync. And then he looked at me. "You remember me now?" he said. "Not as Jonah. As the Watcher." Wearing Jonah like a mask that was starting to fit just right. And I knew, without hesitation, if I didn't end it here, if I let him walk away, he'd carry that smile into every recording, every word, every story. And no one would ever unhear it. So I made a choice, like I had once at the lake. A different kind of deal. I reached into my coat and pulled out the knife. The one Mirtha gave me, forged with salt and bone. I drove it into his throat before he could speak again. His blood didn't look like blood. It looked like ink, and as he collapsed, the lake rippled. The sky blinked, and the water began to hum. He didn't scream. When the blade sank into his throat, Jonah just looked at me, calm, almost relieved. And that was somehow worse than if he'd fought. Worse than if he'd begged. Because it meant that somewhere inside him, whatever was left of Jonah. He knew this had to happen. That I wasn't killing him, not really. I was closing a door. And God help me, I hoped it would stay shut this time. His body crumpled near the edge of the lake, mouth slightly open, eyes locked on nothing. Blood, or whatever had replaced it, poured from the wound, thick and black, more like oil than anything human. It didn't spread across the dirt. It was drawn, pulled, streaming toward the water like iron filings to a magnet. And the lake accepted it. The ripples didn't fade. They deepened. With every beat of Jonah's failing heart, the surface darkened, began to churn, not violently, but deliberately, like something breathing in slow, shallow draws. The humming came next, no longer distant, no longer hidden. It rose from the water like a voice made of wind, slipping through the trees and down my spine. It didn't vibrate in the air. It vibrated inside me. I backed away, hands stained, the knife slick and useless now. My knees threatened to give out. My vision blurred. But I didn't look away, because I could feel it. He wasn't dead. Not Jonah. Not the Watcher. Neither of them ever really died. They shifted. Somewhere between breath and silence, the lake had begun again. Jonah's blood, the ink, slid into the water and bloomed. Not out, but down. Like it knew where it was going. Like it was filling in a shape beneath the surface. I watched as the black stain writhed and stretched, and then, God help me, I saw something move in the lake's reflection. Not on the lake. In it, a figure, crooked, long, walking slowly across the mirrored underside of the water. No footsteps, just hums. I turned to run, but I was already too late, because the humming wasn't just in the lake anymore. It was in me. A low thrum in my ears, beneath my heartbeat, behind my thoughts. A whisper running its fingers through the folds of my mind, and with it came memories that weren't mine. I saw a little girl standing at the edge of a bathtub, staring into water that didn't ripple when she breathed. I saw a teenager writing the same phrase in her notebook, over and over: he watches when I forget. I saw a mother listening to her child hum a lullaby she never taught him, and bleeding from her ears an hour later. I saw Jonah, not as he was, but how he was becoming, sitting in front of a microphone with eyes that were just black holes painted to resemble something human, his voice a melody that laced between every word. And then I saw me, in a mirror, but not looking back, just smiling. There were too many versions of me now, too many paths. The moment I spared Jonah, even for a second, the Watcher found the crack and slid in again. I hadn't killed him, I'd invited him. The wind shifted, and I knew this was the final descent. No more running, no more burying books, no more burning records or cutting off stories at the root. The Watcher had changed. He had evolved beyond names, beyond lakes, beyond memory. He was now in the blood, in stories told in passing, in drawings, in forgotten lyrics. He lived in the quiet before sleep, in the moment when you're not sure if the shadow across the room moved, or if you only imagined it. The door we opened, the one I thought I closed, had been shattered by curiosity, and now the Watcher didn't need a name anymore. He had a face. Mine. I left Jonah's body there at the lake, not because I was cold, but because it didn't matter anymore. The shell was empty, the replication complete. What were Jonah's voice would now be repeated 1,000 times through speakers and memories and dream fragments. And I could feel the pressure building. Somewhere, in places I'd never been, children were humming again. I could hear them. Not in the wind, in my veins. Stillwater Lake had only ever been a cradle. Now he was awake, and he was walking. They say some sounds linger, that a song heard in a dream can follow you into the morning like perfume on skin. But this wasn't a song anymore. It had shape, mass, weight. The humming had grown legs. It walked beside me. Everywhere I went, I felt it pacing. Not just behind me, within me. A slow, dragging hum that settled in the marrow, like my bones had learned the rhythm and wouldn't stop repeating it. Even when I held my breath, even when my heart slowed, Even when I pressed my hands over my ears so hard I saw stars, it was still there. Not a tune, a presence. After Jonah, I didn't go back to motels. No shelters, no crowds. Too dangerous. I knew that now. The more people who saw me, the more reflections he could nest in. I was a carrier, not just of memory, but of him. My face was no longer mine. It was a mask worn by a dozen others now, some aware, most not. I couldn't tell who had seen me and gone on with their lives, and who had seen me and begun to unravel. He was spreading through recollection, through second-hand stories. I had become a cautionary tale told by strangers who didn't even know me. There's this guy, tall, pale, always looking at his reflection. You hum that song, and he shows up. Don't look in the mirror after midnight. He'll be there, behind you. That wasn't a myth anymore. That was my legacy. I tried to retrace the path, find the seams where memory had first split. I went back to where the first copy appeared, the shelter with the missing boy, the one who looked like me. The building was abandoned now, burned halfway down, no official report, just blackened walls and melted cribs. But the graffiti remained. One phrase, sprayed across the back wall in letters that looked painted with fingers, not a can. Hayam Tioste Arasaki. And beneath it, a symbol I recognized instantly, etched in soot, dripping like tar. The same symbol I'd seen carved into Mirtha's walls. The one that pulsed behind my eyelids when I closed them for too long. It was no longer a warning. It was an invitation. I followed the trail deeper. Abandoned towns, crumbling train stations, cracked roads where the asphalt split like veins. Every place bore signs of him. Reflections too dark. Doors that creaked at 3:07 a.m., even when no one had lived there in years. Children's toys scattered in perfect circles. Always humming. In one town, I met a man who hadn't spoken in over a decade. He lived alone, in the shell of an old church, boarded up from the inside with crucifixes nailed in upside-down rows. He let me in without asking who I was. He said one sentence, "You're the echo." I didn't know what he meant, until I heard his voice coming from the basement. Not an echo, not a trick, my voice, pleading, weeping, screaming my sister's name. I ran, didn't ask questions, didn't dig deeper, because I knew, if I saw what was down there, if I listened to myself any longer, he would wear me again. Fresh, whole. The Watcher doesn't need to kill you to erase you. He just needs to outperform you. And my performances were now scattered across the world, playing to audiences who didn't know they were being fed a ghost. I wandered for weeks after that. Months, maybe. Time wasn't linear anymore. It folded over itself like pages in a book left too long in the rain. Faces blurred. Days bled together. But I kept moving, because I knew what would happen if I stayed too long in one place. He would grow curious. He would look closer. I slept in drainage tunnels, under freeway bridges, in the hollow husks of malls. And even in those quiet places, far from lakes, far from mirrors, far from people, he found ways in. A puddle would hold a reflection too long. A broken TV would flash to life at exactly 3:07 a.m., showing nothing but my face, smiling, and always the humming. Once, I found a child on the side of the road, barefoot, alone, humming softly. He looked up at me with eyes too wide for his face and said, "I dreamed your name last night." I never told him my name. I hadn't spoken it aloud in years. But he knew. And then he opened his mouth wider, and I heard my own voice fall out, laughing. I ran again. But I knew, even then, that it wasn't about running. It was about surviving long enough to decide what came next. Because if he was going to wear me, if he was going to sing through me, feed through me, spread through the hollow of my face, then I had to burn the mask before it hardened. The answer wouldn't come from mirrors. It wouldn't come from lakes. It would come from roots, deeper than memory, older than grief. A place beneath the name, beneath the story, where origin ends, where the Watcher doesn't walk, where the first silence still breathes. I had to find it. Before he did. There's a place where memory runs out, where the oldest story ends not with a word, but with a pause so deep the world forgot to breathe. I didn't know where it was. Not exactly, but I could feel it pulling me, like a heartbeat buried under stone. And if I wanted to end this, really end this, that's where I had to go, beneath the memory, beneath the face, beneath the hum. It started with the dreams, not nightmares, not anymore. They were quieter than that, stranger. I began waking with soil under my fingernails and ash in my mouth. My shoes damp with dew, though I hadn't left my bed. One night I awoke standing knee deep in a swamp, miles from where I'd fallen asleep, the water perfectly still and black enough to reflect a sky with no stars. I didn't remember walking there. I didn't remember dreaming. But the moment I looked down and saw my reflection smiling, I knew he was closer than ever. That night, I stopped running. I followed, wherever the dreams dropped me. Fields, forests, dry riverbeds, I listened. The hum was always there, buried beneath the insects, beneath the wind, even beneath the silence. It threaded through everything. And then, one night, I found something new. A crack in the earth. Not large. Just wide enough to notice. Just dark enough to fear. A line in the dirt behind an abandoned church, filled with a cold that didn't belong in summer. I crouched beside it and held my hand just above it. And the hum stopped. It was like the air around it had been vacuumed of sound. A pocket of stillness that tasted wrong. I pressed my palm to the crack. It didn't tremble. It breathed. Something below was waiting. Not the watcher. Something older. I came back the next night with supplies. Rope, flashlight, 2 days of food I wouldn't eat. I didn't leave a note. There was no one left to write to. No one remembered me. Not the real me. Just the stories he'd worn with my face. I widened the crack with a rusted crowbar, dug with my hands when that wasn't enough. For hours, until the earth gave way beneath me and I fell. Not far. Just deep enough to be alone. The air in the cavern was wrong. It didn't move. It didn't echo. The walls weren't stone, not really. They were smooth and pulsing, like something once alive had curled around itself to sleep and forgot to die. The flashlight flickered the second I turned it on. I didn't need it. There was a glow, not bright, but constant, like the breath of something dreaming. I walked. There were no forks in the path, no tunnels branching off, just one long corridor that narrowed and dipped, sometimes so low I had to crawl. Along the walls, carvings, symbols, ones I'd seen before, in motel rooms, in mirrors, but they weren't warnings here. They were instructions, maps, blueprints of something that wasn't physical, something ideological. I followed them without knowing why. And then I reached it. A door, not wood, not stone, not metal. Just a surface that didn't belong. It reflected nothing. I mean that in the most literal sense. When I looked at it, I saw nothing. Not blackness, not my face, just a blank absence. It hurt to stare at. My eyes tried to slide off it like oil on glass. This was the root, the 0 point. Where memory was born, or where it died. I stood before it and didn't breathe. And that's when I felt it, him, coiling around my ribs, threading through my spine like smoke. The watcher. Not in the cave. In me. He knew where I was now. He had followed my absence the way others follow presence. I had made so much noise by trying to be forgotten. He had found the silence and crawled into it, and I felt it. His question. Not spoken. Not heard. Just felt. Are you sure? Because once I stepped through that door, if it was a door, there would be no going back. No remembering. Not just for me. For anyone. It would be a cut so deep the wound would erase the scar. I pressed my hand to the surface. It was warm. Not like skin. Not like life. Like regret. And then I pushed. There was no sound. No light. No fall. Just a shift. 1 second I was in the cavern, alone and broken, and humming a tune I hated. The next, I was nowhere. Not even inside myself. And there, in that place, I saw it. Not him. Not the watcher. The truth. He didn't come from the lake. The lake came from us. From our grief. our forgetting, our hunger to blame the dark for things we couldn't carry. We made him. Every time we whispered a ghost story. Every time we wondered what we had left behind. Every time we remembered something we wished we hadn't, we gave him shape. And now he had too many faces to name, even mine, especially mine. So I did the only thing left to do. I reached inside the version of myself that had once remembered, and I pulled the thread loose. The memory of Elsie, the lake, the humming, the door, and I let it go. I felt it tear as it left me, like pulling a root from your own heart. But once it was gone, I heard nothing, and it was beautiful. No hum, no fear, no reflection. Know him. I didn't know if I was alive, but I knew he wasn't, not anymore. Because if no one remembers him, he has nothing to wear. Waking came slow, like rising through cold syrup. My eyes opened to a sky I didn't recognize. Too pale, too still, as if someone had painted clouds onto glass and forgotten to let them move. The air was thick, and the wind didn't hum. No birds, no distant cars, no breath from the trees, just silence. The kind of silence I'd begged for. I sat up in a field that stretched far and flat in every direction, overgrown with tall, dry grass that whispered against my clothes as I moved. I didn't remember falling asleep. I didn't remember coming here. I didn't even remember my name. But I wasn't afraid. That was the first sign something had worked. Fear had followed me for so long I'd mistaken it for breath. But now, nothing. No shadow in the corners. No twitch in the reflection. No sense of something standing just behind me. It was like I'd unplugged from a current that had been running through me for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't natural. I stood slowly. No ache in my legs. No scar on my temple. I turned in a slow circle, searching for landmarks, for roads, for even the hint of civilization, but found only field and sky, and still no humming. Something had changed. Everything maybe. I tried to remember how I'd gotten here. The lake. The door. The silence that swallowed the watcher. It was all a blur, slippery and soft at the edges, like trying to remember a dream that never quite belonged to you. Every time I pushed for detail, it slipped further away. A face surfaced briefly, a girl, a name, but even that dissolved before I could hold on to it. Elsie. The name flickered like a candle and was gone. I closed my eyes and tried harder, clawing at the silence, wanting the grief back, if only to remember who I was. But all I found was the echo of a choice long made, long buried. The memory was gone. He was gone, and I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow, because there's a weight to forgetting, a cost. You don't just lose the pain, you lose the shape of yourself that grew around it. The scar that told you where you'd been, the memory that whispered who you'd loved, who you'd hurt, and what you swore you'd never do again. That's the trade. That's the price of starving the thing that fed. On grief, you kill it by becoming light, but in doing so, you let go of every heavy truth that ever grounded you. I wandered through the field for hours, maybe longer. Time didn't behave the way it used to. I came across a road eventually, cracked asphalt, empty yellow lines. A gas station sat on the horizon like a mirage, flickering in the heat. I walked toward it, the wind rising behind me, brushing the grass into soft waves. And still, the silence held. Inside the gas station, a radio crackled softly behind the counter. No song, just static. A woman at the register looked up, smiled politely. "You look like you've been walking a long time," she said. I nodded. "Don't get many folks coming from that direction," she added. "Where'd you come from?" I opened my mouth, paused, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer. "I'm not sure," I said. She didn't press. I bought water. A sandwich I didn't eat. She handed me a paper map and circled the nearest town with a pink marker. I didn't ask its name. It didn't matter. I wasn't going there to find anyone. I was going there to exist, to start whatever came next. That night, I rented a room above a diner. Small bed, clean mirror, I stared into it for a long time, waiting for something to move that wasn't me. Nothing did. I blinked. It blinked. I smiled. It smiled. Just me, only me. For the first time in years, I climbed into bed and didn't listen for the hum. I fell asleep without fear, without guilt, without remembering. And yet, just before sleep claimed me, I had a thought, not loud, not lingering, a question. Who was I before the door? And deep in the soil beneath the diner, something stirred. Not a monster, not a shadow, just a seed. Because even in forgetting, something remains. A name whispered too low to be heard. A face glimpsed in a reflection too fast to see. The shape of a story aching to return. But not yet. For now, the silence holds. For now, the hum is still. For now, a month passed, maybe two. Time had begun to wear soft edges, each day melting into the next like old paper exposed to sun. In the small town with no name I'd come to live in, people didn't ask questions. They were kind in the way people are when they've given up on change. The diner served burnt coffee and overcooked eggs, but it opened every morning at 6 sharp. The local mechanic taught me how to change my own oil. No one looked too hard at me. And more importantly, no one seemed to remember me. That was the rule now. Live light. Keep moving, even when still. Never weigh anything down. Not words, not memories, not names. Especially not names. Mine, whatever it once was, had thinned to smoke. Most days I walked. I followed the hills that folded around the town, quiet and green, and listened to the world not hum. It was a strange comfort, the silence. A reminder that I had done it, that I had cut him out. Not just from my mind, but from the world itself. No one here remembered the watcher. No one flinched at reflective surfaces. No one avoided humming lullabies to their children. The shadows were just shadows again. I kept a journal. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I needed to know when I began to forget. When the gaps in my mind were no longer hollow spaces I'd made on purpose, but growing cracks leaking into the rest of me. Some days, I woke and couldn't recall what month it was. Other days, I forgot what color my hair had been before I stopped checking mirrors. But I never forgot her. Not fully. She came in flashes, flickers of a smaller hand in mine, a laugh that sounded like bells underwater. Her name was gone, burned out with the rest of the infection. But her absence was still a shape inside me, and that shape ached. One morning, while shelving books at the local library for extra cash, I found something strange. Not a reflection, not a whisper, a book. It had no title on the spine. The cover was pale leather, smooth and old, like it had never been touched by light. It had no library sticker, no barcode. When I opened it, the pages were blank, except for the very center. There, in a child's shaky handwriting, was a sentence: "He sleeps behind the first story ever told." I slammed the book shut. My chest constricted. That was impossible. No one here remembered. No one should remember. And yet, there it was, written like a dare, like a trap baited with ink and innocence. I checked the cameras. The library had none. I asked the head librarian about it. She looked confused, shook her head. She'd never seen the book, didn't recognize the binding. When I showed it to her, she frowned and said, "That's not ours." "Where do the donations come from?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Mostly drop-offs. People leave boxes. We sort them. Might have come from the school." But when I checked the school's library, they told me their books had all been digitized years ago. No physical copies allowed. That night, I took the book home. I told myself I wouldn't open it again. I did. The next time, there were more words. Half a page now. A short paragraph, but growing. The words read like something halfway between a warning and a memory. Disjointed images of a mirror cracking, a name swallowed by a pond, and a door carved from teeth. I didn't sleep. I placed the book under my mattress, heart racing, ears straining for even the faintest trace of that sound. But the hum didn't come. Still, something had changed. People in town began dreaming again. You could see it in their eyes the next morning. They didn't talk about it. Didn't even remember the details. But the where was there. The dull glaze, the exhaustion just beneath their polite smiles. I walked to the edge of town, into the woods, to the largest mirror I could find, the surface of an old quarry pond. I stared into it for hours. Nothing looked back, not yet. But I felt it, the way you feel a storm hours before it breaks, vibrating somewhere below the skin. Something was trying to find me. Not him, no. The Watcher was gone. He'd been cut from memory, but stories, once told, never really die, they just wait. And something was remembering him. Something, or someone, had cracked open the place where I'd buried him. The book was a seed, and someone had planted it in the town where forgetting was the only thing keeping the door closed. That night, when I returned to my apartment, the book was gone. In its place, on my kitchen table, was a child's drawing. Crayons, crude lines, a stick figure standing beside a pond. Above it, written in the same handwriting, "He wore your face to get back in." I dropped the paper, tried to breathe, but it hit me like a wave of cold. It wasn't the Watcher coming back. It was me, the version of me I erased, the one who remembered everything, the one who burned through mirrors and hummed lullabies and stabbed Jonah beneath a sky that had stopped blinking. That version of me was still alive, and it was finding its way home. The moment I saw that drawing on my table, crayon lines too precise, the handwriting too familiar, I knew the damage wasn't from outside. It had started within. I hadn't just forgotten him to destroy him. I'd forgotten myself, and now the memory of me, the version that stared too long into reflections, that hunted monsters until he became one, had become its own entity. That version had bled through. It made sense in a twisted way. If forgetting was the only way to kill the Watcher, then what happened to the parts of me that remembered? They didn't vanish. They fractured off, floating like ghosts behind mirrors and dreams. One by one, they gathered enough of themselves to form a shape, a mind, a will, not just haunted by memory, but built from it. And now he wanted back in. Not to reclaim this life, to overwrite it. I sat for a long time at that table, staring at the drawing. Not because it frightened me, though it did, but because it felt like looking into a mirror and seeing someone blinking out of sync. I hadn't just escaped something ancient. I had unknowingly created something worse. I needed to find the drawing's origin. A child's hand had made it, or something imitating a child. I walked the streets the next day, listening at bus stops and outside the school, searching for any mention of strange dreams, or forgotten books, or children humming songs no one taught them. At first, nothing. Then, at the park, I found her. A little girl, maybe 6, sitting alone on the swing. Her fingers were stained with orange crayon. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, just swayed gently, back and forth, humming, not the tune, not exactly, but a corrupted version. Slower, out of rhythm. Like someone trying to remember a song they were never supposed to hear. I sat on the swing beside her and said nothing. After a while, she stopped humming and looked up at me. "He talks to me in my dreams," she said plainly. I didn't answer. "He says you're not done yet." I swallowed. "Does he tell you his name?" She shook her head. "He says he has your name, but it's locked in the water. Still water. Always back to that place." But I had severed the link. The lake was empty, dead, or so I'd thought. The girl pulled something from her pocket, a piece of folded paper, another drawing. This time, it showed 2 stick figures. One had a knife. The other had no face. Beneath them, in messy scrawl, "Only one of you can stay." She handed it to me, then got off the swing and walked away without another word. I didn't follow her. I couldn't move. I felt it again, that slow, creeping pressure behind my ribs. Not humming. Not yet. But the quiet throb of a memory pushing up from where I had buried it. Like a tooth working its way back through gum. A pain I'd thought I'd ripped out at the root. But I hadn't removed the infection. I'd only amputated the symptom. The version of me that had lived through every horror, every death, every twisted echo. He wasn't content to vanish. He wanted permanence. A body, a voice, a life. He wanted to be the only version left. That night, I boarded up every mirror in my apartment. I unplugged the TV, covered the windows with sheets, removed anything reflective. Even the shine off the sink faucet unnerved me, because I knew how it would start. A glimpse, a twitch, a blink out of rhythm, and then he would be here. Not as a phantom, as a replacement. He'd been studying me, preparing. Every choice I made to survive became a blueprint he could follow in reverse. And he was almost done. The book in the library, planted by him. The crayon drawings. His voice, finding mouths that hadn't learned to lie yet. He didn't need to haunt me. He needed me to invite him. Because I was the last door left. I had locked every other one. He was knocking from the inside now. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the dark and waited. I knew he would come. Not as a ghost, not as the watcher, but as me, the version with all the memories, the pain, the full weight of what we had done. The one who never forgot what the humming sounded like in the dark. The one who stabbed Jonah and whispered lullabies to the dead. And when he came, he wouldn't ask. He would stare. He would smile. And he would step in. And the world wouldn't know the difference. Because he wouldn't be wearing a mask. He'd be wearing my skin. I didn't hear him come in. That's how I knew it was him. Every other threat in my life had come with noise. Footsteps on wet leaves, the screech of rusted hinges, the distant hum that slithered under my ribs. But this was quiet, surgical, like he'd always been here, just waiting for the right moment to surface. It started with the mirror. Even though I had boarded them, I kept one. The smallest one, no larger than a postcard, hidden in a drawer under 3 layers of clothes. I'd told myself it was for safety, to check for signs of infection, reflection anomalies. But the truth was simpler, dumber. I was curious. Part of me still wanted to know, and he knew that. Of course he did. That night, I pulled it out. No sound, no wind, just silence, thick and wrong, like the room was holding its breath. And then I looked. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just watched. Not in the way the watcher had, cold, distant, otherworldly, but in a way that made my knees tremble and my teeth ache. Because this was me. Not a copy. Not a shadow. Not a mimic. It was the face I'd carried for years, but burned. His skin was paler than mine now, eyes sunken, as if memory itself had begun to consume him from the inside out. But the worst part, he looked calm, resolved, like a man who had already won. I wanted to drop the mirror, smash it, but I couldn't, because he opened his mouth and spoke my voice. You left me in the dark too long. I said nothing. I remembered everything so you wouldn't have to. That was the deal, wasn't it? You forget. I carry it. But now, he tilted his head. Now you want peace, while I rot in the ash. My throat went dry. You're not real. He smiled. Not with joy. With sorrow. You keep saying that? He whispered, as if saying it will make it true. The mirror began to pulse in my hand. Not with heat, but with pressure. Like a heartbeat made of stone. And then the glass didn't reflect me at all. Only him. And behind him, her. The little girl. Elsie. Eyes wide, mouth stitched shut. And I remember. God help me, I remembered everything. The lake. The humming. The choice. The door I'd closed not to kill the watcher, but to bury the part of myself that had seen too much, carried too much, done too much. I hadn't destroyed evil. I had given it shape. In him. In me. And now he was clawing his way back. You're not ready, he said, voice soft as breath. But I am. He raised his hand in the reflection. And my arm moved. Not on its own. Under command. I screamed and dropped the mirror. It shattered against the floor, but the reflection stayed. Each shard still showed him. Not me. 1,000 broken pieces of a self I thought I'd left behind. Each one crawling with memory. Each one whispering my name. I backed away. The room began to warp. Walls pressed inward. Light dimmed. not supernatural, mental. My brain folding under the pressure of duality. Two lives. One body, one soul pulled in opposite directions. I knew then he wouldn't stop. Not unless I ended it completely. Not just forgetting. Not burying. Not hiding. Erasure. But how do you kill a version of yourself without going with it? How do you unmake a memory without becoming hollow? I picked up the largest shard. My hand bled, but I didn't drop it. He stared up at me from the glass, calm and patient. You know what you have to do, he said. And he was right. Because he wasn't a curse, he was a ledger. A record of pain, loss, guilt, and blood. All the things I had chosen to forget. All the things I had given to him. And if I wanted to live now, if I wanted to be free, I had to settle the debt. Fully. Finally, I had to meet him where we began. Stillwater. The lake. The root of every hum, every reflection, every wrong turn. Because that's where he was born. That's where I was born. Not from innocence, but from the moment I chose to forget. I packed that night. Not much, just the shard. And a name I hadn't spoken in years. Mine. The original one. The one he would recognize. Because if I said it again, if I claimed it, I could either reclaim what I lost or vanish with it. Either way, the story ends at the water. And it ends with me. Stillwater hadn't changed. That was the first thing that unsettled me. After everything that had happened, after the bodies, the disappearances, the fires, you'd expect some trace of it. A scar on the earth, a tremor in the soil. But when I stepped off the bus and walked the cracked road toward the lake, it greeted me with the same dead calm it always had. No birds, no wind, just that unnatural stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath again. There were no other cars, no campers, no signs that anyone had been here in years. Yet the trail down to the water was perfectly cleared, as if someone, or something, had been waiting. I followed it. I should have been afraid, and maybe, in some part of me too deep to name, I was. But mostly, I felt ready. Tired, but ready. Like someone walking toward their own funeral and finally understanding why it has to happen. The lake was a mirror. Not metaphorically, literally. So flat, so glass, smooth, I couldn't tell where the water ended and the air began. The trees on the other side hovered in perfect upside, down symmetry. I stepped closer and saw myself reflected in that perfect surface. But it wasn't just me. He was there too, standing beside me, as if he had never left. Only now he wasn't hiding behind my face or lurking in shadow. He was whole, full, solid, not a reflection, a presence. I didn't flinch. You came, he said, voice quiet. I never really left, I replied. Neither did you. He nodded. Do you know what we are? I think so. We are memory, he said. We are the wound that never healed. You tried to seal it by forgetting. I stayed behind to remember, but a wound split in half only festers. He took a step forward. His feet didn't disturb the water. Mine did. Ripples curled out beneath my boots. I'm not here to fight you, I said. I'm here to end it. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Endings require sacrifice, I know. He held up a hand. Between his fingers, he held something I hadn't seen in years. A small, rusted music box. The one Elsie had carried the day we lost her. The one I'd thrown into the lake, hoping it would drown the sound, the guilt, the truth. But it hadn't. It had floated for days before sinking, and somehow he'd pulled it back up. He wound it slowly. The melody began to play, that tune, slower now, broken. Notes skipping like a record warped in fire. I felt something inside me unravel, memories long hidden clawing their way up my spine. I remembered her face, her scream, the way the water swallowed her faster than I could reach, and the silence afterward. That awful, smothering silence I mistook for peace. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The song said it all. I stepped forward, closer to the edge. The water shivered at my presence. Reflections bent. His face rippled beside mine, no longer separate, but merging. You're not real, I whispered. I am every piece you left behind. Then take them back. I raised the shard of mirror from my coat pocket. The last piece. The fragment that had survived every flyer, every flight, every forgetting. His eyes fixed on it. "Once this breaks," I said, "we're both gone." He nodded and smiled. "I'm tired," he said. "Me too." Then I threw it. The mirror shard hit the lake with a sharp, impossible crack, like glass hitting stone. The surface didn't absorb it. It shattered. Not just the water, the reflection itself. Cracks spidered across the entire lake, ripping through the mirrored image of trees, sky, self. Light bent. Wind screamed through branches that hadn't moved in years. And the air rushed in, a void filling itself. He screamed. Not in pain, in release. Like something that had been clenched for too long finally exhaled. I dropped to my knees as the world around me began to bend, to warp, to crumble. Not physically, but structurally. The space between memory and presence folded, snapping like tight cables. I saw flashes. Every moment I had run, every time I'd silenced my guilt, every time I'd looked into a mirror and lied to myself. Gone. One by one, they broke, until only one thing remained. Elsie. I saw her again, not as a ghost, not as guilt, but as she was. Alive, whole, laughing, and I wept. Because that was the last thing I had to give. Even her, especially her. The image faded, and with it the lake returned to stillness. No reflection, no hum, just water. When I stood, I was alone. Completely. He was gone. So was she. So was everything that had once tied me to the horror I'd carried like a second spine. I looked down. My reflection stared back, only mine. And for the first time since all of this began, I whispered my name aloud. It didn't echo. It didn't call anything forth. It simply was. And that was enough. I turned from the lake and walked away. I didn't expect the world to feel different. That's the strange thing. When you spend so long haunted, driven, hunted by the echo of what you've done and what you were, you imagine that release will come with trumpets or light, some grand finale of sensation. But when I walked away from Stillwater, shoes damp with mud, and a heart finally emptied of the man who had lived inside me like rot, the everything was just normal. The air smelled the same. The sky remained a sullen gray. The trees whispered in the same dry voice they always had. But inside there was a stillness I didn't trust. Not yet. It was like walking out of a house after a storm and seeing the sun, knowing full well the foundation had cracked and the basement still might be filling with water. I found the road again and kept walking. No destination, no map, just motion. That was all I knew how to do, keep moving. One town faded into another, faces blurred, names passed through me like smoke. I slept in bus stops, cheap motels, sometimes under the stars. The quiet followed me. So did the emptiness. Because here's the thing no one tells you about killing the ghost in your mirror. It doesn't bring back what you lost. It just leaves a clean wound. And clean wounds still bleed. I thought maybe I could fill the hollow with something else. Something ordinary. I tried small jobs. I washed dishes. I folded linens in a hospital laundry room. I stocked shelves in a hardware store where no one ever looked you in the eye. I didn't mind. I welcomed it, actually. The dullness, the repetition. It kept my hands busy while my mind stayed mercifully blank. But at night it always came back. Not the hum, not the watcher, not even him. The silence, the absence. It was louder now than any noise had ever been. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for something to arrive. Fear, memory, even guilt. But there was nothing. Like I'd scrubbed the inside of my soul too clean, and now couldn't feel when it should ache. One night, after a long shift at the hospital, I sat outside on the fire escape and lit a cigarette, even though I hadn't smoked in years. The wind had that electric tension, the kind that made you feel like a storm was trying to remember how to form. I exhaled and watched the smoke vanish into the dark. And then I heard it. Not humming, laughter, a child's, brief, distant, and very, very familiar. I stood. The alley below was empty. No footsteps, no rustling. Just a light flickering in the apartment across the street. I waited. Nothing. Still, the sound lingered in the back of my mind like a tick you can't quite scratch. The next day, I asked around the hospital. Quietly, casually. Had anyone seen a little girl wandering the halls? Maybe playing near the basement. Most shook their heads. One nurse paused, though. "You know," she said, "there's a rumor about that. Some of the overnight staff say they've seen a girl in white down near the old records wing. We don't use it anymore. The power doesn't even work down there. I think it's just talk." I nodded, pretending it didn't hit me like a nail through the chest. But I knew better. That night, I took a flashlight and slipped into the dark. The records wing was exactly as described. Dust thick on the floor, ceiling tiles sagging with moisture, file cabinets rusted shut. It smelled like paper and mildew and forgotten things. And then I saw her, at the end of the hallway, a flash of white. Small, barefoot, gone as quickly as she appeared. I didn't call out. I just followed, each step slower, heavier, because some part of me knew what I'd find. The hallway led to a dead-end room. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A single cracked mirror hung above an old desk. She stood in front of it. Not her. Not really. A shape. A memory. A reflection that had nowhere else to go. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. She raised her hand and pointed. To the mirror. I stepped closer. Looked. At first, I saw only myself. And then, behind my eyes, him. Just for a second. A flicker. But it was enough. He was still there. Still inside. Not all of him. Not as before. But a trace. A root that never got pulled. Because killing the reflection doesn't always kill the thing casting it. I staggered back. The girl, memory, ghost, echo was gone. The mirror remained. And etched into the surface, barely visible, you buried the name. Not the story. I stood there for a long time, breath shallow, hands shaking. Because I realized then, you don't kill a story by forgetting it. You only delay its next telling. And someone, somewhere, was already starting to remember. I couldn't leave it alone. I tried. I went home. Ripped the page from my journal, flushed it. Smashed the old mirror from the records room. Told myself it had just been stress, hallucination, some cruel trick of memory. But denial is a thin curtain, and memory is a weed. You can scorch the surface, but its roots are deep. And in me, they were still alive. Days passed. I worked, slept, pretended. But each morning I woke with a single phrase stuck behind my eyes like a splinter. You buried the name. Not the story. That was the key, wasn't it? I had spent so long trying to erase him, burn him, forget him. But stories don't die from silence. They die when no one remembers how they end. And I had never given this one an ending. I had only run. I started researching. Not online, not digitally. He had always lived in circuits and reflections, in echoes and signal. I kept it analog, card catalogs, microfilm, handwritten logs in forgotten basements of public libraries that smelled like mold and dust and skin oil. I followed the trail like a bloodhound chasing the scent of its own wound. It led me somewhere I didn't expect. An archive. Not a government one, not medical, not even historical. It was called the Quiet Stacks. No signage, no digital footprint. I found it referenced in the margins of a hand, typed letter stored in a regional library archive from 1963. The writer called it the place where stories rot when no one's brave enough to end them. That sounded right. The location was vague. Backroads. Forest curves, landmarks that no longer existed. But I followed them anyway. I drove for hours, sun behind me, heart tight in my ribs like it was waiting for a blow that had already landed. And then I found it. An old house. 3 stories. Stone base. Rotting wood above, leaning ever so slightly to the left, as if it had grown tired of its own shape. Ivy strangled the windows. The front door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the smell hit me. Not decay. Not rot. Old breath. Like every word ever whispered within these walls still lingered. Hanging in the air, too stubborn to leave. The Quiet Stacks weren't like any library I'd seen. There were no computers, no lights. Just shelves. Endless, curving, tilting shelves packed with journals, reels, hand-bound manuscripts. Each one labeled not by title, but by emotion, Hassam. Rajirait. Garif. I wandered through them like a sleepwalker. And then I found my shelf. It didn't say my name. It said, Theoneouio Splet. Only one book sat there. Black leather. No title. Cold to the touch, I opened it, and every page was blank, except the last. On it, written in handwriting I hadn't used since I was a child, you cannot burn what you never finished. A sharp sound echoed behind me. I turned. A figure stood in the aisle, pale, ragged, familiar. Not him, not me. But what was left when we split? A third thing, incomplete. It took a step forward, and I saw it clearly. Its face was mine, but without any features. Like something had tried to sculpt a man and stopped halfway. A smooth oval where eyes should be, a slit of a mouth, no nose, skin like stretched wax. It raised its hand. In it, a quill, long, bone, white, dipped in ink that shimmered like oil. It handed it to me, and then it pointed at the book. Not at the blank pages. At the last one, at the line. You cannot burn what you never finished. The meaning was clear. This was my task, not to forget, not to flee, but to write it down, to tell it, to give it weight, to complete the arc. Only a finished story can rot. Only a buried one can feed the earth again. But to write it, I had to remember everything, even the parts I had sliced out of my soul and thrown into lakes and mirrors and fire. Even her, even me, even him. I dipped the quill into the black ink. It screamed. Not aloud. In my blood, every cell in my body remembered the hum. Every bone in me whispered warnings. But I wrote. First the name, then the lake, then the mirror, then the lie I told myself. And the moment I split, the story poured out, not in words, but in pain, in images, in grief pressed into pages like old leaves. The story that had no clean hero, no vanquished villain, just a boy who watched something he loved die and decided to become empty to escape the weight. And when I finished, the book closed itself. The figure was gone. The shelves were gone. The house was silent. And in my hands I held the book, complete. I stepped outside. The house behind me sagged deeper, sighed once, and then collapsed inward like lungs deflating. No smoke, no flames, just silence. But this silence didn't press down on me. It lifted. And for the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel haunted. I felt whole. Because the story wasn't forgotten anymore. It was finished. And that was enough. For now. There's a strange emptiness that comes after finishing something that's consumed you. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like standing on a stage after the curtain falls, lights off, crowd gone, with the echoes of applause, or screams, still ringing faintly in your ears. That's what it was like. Walking away from the ruins of the quiet stacks, with the finished book pressed tight to my chest, like it might try to escape if I loosened my grip. I didn't know where to go. For so long, every step I'd taken had been away from something. Away from Stillwater, away from the Watcher. Away from the split that carved a hole through my memory and left me with a ghost wearing my skin. But now there was nothing left to run from. No darkness chasing at my heels. Just a strange and unfamiliar stillness. A clean slate that didn't feel comforting. It felt hollow. I wandered. That's the only word for it. I walked through towns I didn't recognize and didn't want to. I slept in places that didn't ask for names and didn't offer conversation. I stopped talking to people altogether. There was no reason to. I had nothing to say. What do you tell someone after you've written your own exorcism? The book never left my side. I kept it wrapped in cloth, hidden deep in my pack, where no one would see it and no one could ask about it. I never opened it. I didn't need to. I knew every page, every sentence, every line carved from pain and fire and fractured memory, the only copy of the story that should never have existed, the only record of the thing I used to be. But finishing a story isn't the same as escaping it. I found that out the day I walked into a gas station bathroom and saw a message scratched into the mirror above the sink. TURSTL, lusty energy. 3 words. Carved deep, jagged, fresh. The kind of message left by someone who didn't finish their story. Or worse, someone who read mine. I stepped back and checked the mirror for movement. Nothing shifted. My reflection stayed where it should. No blinks out of time. No second shadows. But I could feel it again, that thrum just under the surface, like a heart beating through concrete. Something was stirring. Not the watcher. Not him. Not even the splintered version of me I'd destroyed. Something new. Or maybe something old. Because the story had an ending now, which meant it could be told, passed down, whispered into the ears of children before sleep, transcribed, repeated, spread, and stories like that. They don't rot in silence. They infect, they grow, and someone, somewhere, had found it. That night I checked my pack. The book was gone. Not misplaced. Not stolen. Gone. The cloth it had been wrapped in was folded neatly, placed back into the same space, like a calling card. And underneath it, where the book had once been, sat a single Polaroid photograph. Of me, asleep taken from above. I stared at it for hours, waiting for the tremor of rage or panic or fear to come. It didn't. All I felt was exhaustion. The kind that goes bone deep. That no amount of rest can fix. Because I understood what was happening. The story wasn't mine anymore. It had never truly been mine alone. I'd just been the first to write it down. To complete the loop. Now it was out there, buried in hands that didn't understand its weight, being told wrong, warped, retold. Used like all stories are, the watcher, the mirrors, the hum, the girl, me, just pieces now. Symbols. It wouldn't stop with me. The next person to find it wouldn't know to finish it. Wouldn't understand what must be left unsaid. Wouldn't bury the name deep enough. And the story would wake again. Worse. Hungrier. Because now it had precedent. It had form. A shape sharpened by memory and trauma and blood. I burned the Polaroid. Not because it would help, but because it was the only thing I could still control. I watched the edges curl and blacken. Watched my sleeping face melt away into ash. Then I sat on the floor and stared at my reflection in the dark window for hours. Waiting, not for something to appear, but for the silence to break. And when it did, I didn't move. Because I knew the truth. You don't kill a story by telling it. You only teach it how to tell itself. I first noticed it in the supermarket. 2 aisles over, a low droning sound that didn't quite match the store's usual hum of refrigeration units and soft pop music. It was quiet at first, almost forgettable, like a sound that nestles behind your ear rather than in front of you. But then it grew louder and familiar. That same pattern. 3 low notes, a pause, then one high. The tune I hadn't heard since I shattered the mirror in the record's wing. Since I believed I'd buried the final breath of a nightmare that had haunted me for years. But this was different. Not malicious. Not heavy with presence. It was children. I turned the corner slowly, heart knocking against my ribs like it had just remembered how to be afraid. There were 3 of them, siblings maybe, standing near the frozen pizzas, swaying slightly in unison as they hummed. Eyes closed, faces calm. The melody rising and falling in sync, like they were remembering something from a dream. Or from someone else's. I didn't speak. Didn't interrupt. I just watched. And then, as if on cue, they stopped. All at once. Their eyes opened and turned to me in perfect silence. Not with hostility. Not even confusion. Just recognition. The smallest, maybe 6 or 7, took a step forward. Her eyes never left mine. She opened her mouth to speak but said nothing. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, something I didn't want to see, something I had seen before. A page, torn from the book, the one I had written, the one that was gone, the one I thought I had sealed shut with blood and silence. She held it out. I didn't take it. She didn't insist. After a long moment, She placed it gently on the freezer door and walked away, her siblings falling in beside her. None of them looked back. I waited until they were gone before I approached. The page fluttered slightly in the cold air. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to. The handwriting was mine, and not just in style. It was a direct copy. I knew the curve of the letters, the places where my hand shook, where the ink had blotted because I hesitated. This wasn't imitation. It was replication. But the words weren't from the book's end. They were from the beginning. The same first line I'd scribbled in desperation the night I entered the quiet stacks. If you're reading this, it's already too late. My hands shook, not from fear, from fury. The book hadn't been stolen. It had been taken, copied, distributed, taught. And now children, were humming it like a lullaby. The melody meant to summon what I had spent years silencing, and they didn't even know what they were calling. I left the store in a daze, the page burning a hole in my pocket. The world outside looked the same, but something was wrong. The shadows were thinner. The reflections in windows took just a second too long to match my movements. The silence between sounds seemed to stretch wider, like reality was adjusting itself to make room for something, or someone. I went back to the motel, locked the door, pulled the shades, turned off every light. I sat on the bed and laid the page out in front of me. Then I pulled out my notebook, my real one, not the cursed ledger that had vanished, and began writing. I didn't know what I was hoping to accomplish. Maybe a counter story, maybe a warning, maybe nothing. But I had to do something, because this wasn't just a memory anymore. It was spreading, like an infection passed down through whispers and lullabies and games played in shadows. A new kind of virus, one that didn't kill the body, just the space inside where truth used to live. I scribbled for hours, hands cramping, eyes burning, and the whole time I could hear it, not in the room, not in the air, but in my own skull, a hum, soft, constant, growing. Because the children weren't the end. They were the beginning. The story wasn't just being remembered now. It was being reborn. I didn't sleep that night, not even a second. The motel room felt too small, the air too still, and the silence, once a welcome end to chaos, had grown into something watchful. I kept my back to the mirror above the dresser. It was covered with a towel, but still I swore I could feel it breathing. Like it remembered me, like it knew I'd failed. The children haunted my thoughts, not because they frightened me, but because they didn't. That calmness, that stillness in their eyes, those were the marks of someone who had already been touched, already changed, but too gently to know it. They were carriers, and I had seen what that hum could do when it finally took root. So I went looking again. I started with schools, small towns first, the kind with peeling paint on playgrounds and empty PTA meetings. I wasn't subtle. I didn't have time to be. I asked questions, showed sketches of the music box, hummed a few bars of the tune just to see if any faces shifted. Most kids stared blankly, but a few their eyes flickered. They didn't speak, didn't smile, just nodded once, slowly, like they were remembering something that hadn't happened yet. I followed one of them home. Tommy, a boy of maybe 8, who didn't seem startled when I approached his front yard. His house was ordinary. Yellow siding, broken swing on the porch, the sound of cartoons leaking from an open window. But he didn't look like he belonged there. He looked like he was waiting. "Do you know the song?" I asked him. He nodded. "Who taught it to you?" He looked up at me with pale, almost clouded eyes. "The girl in the wall." I felt my stomach drop. He turned and went inside without another word. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That was enough. The infection had changed form. It wasn't just reflections now. It had moved into spaces, gaps, places where memory slips, where sound carries strange. The hollow between walls, the stillness between footsteps, the part of a child's mind that's just empty enough to make room for something that hums and whispers and waits. And the girl, Elsie, or something wearing her shape, she was back, but she wasn't mine anymore. She belonged to the story now. I went to the library that night, not to read, to look. Deep in the archives, I found a record of an old urban legend from a mining town 2 states over. The date shocked me. It was decades before I was born. Yet the description was nearly identical, a humming heard by children. A pale girl glimpsed through cracks in the wall, a story passed by hand, written pages that couldn't be traced. It ended the same way, too. Do not finish the song, the note warned. Do not say her name. But the final sentence hit harder. Once the story is known, it will begin again. I closed the book and felt my breath catch. Because it had never been about me. I wasn't the first. Just the most recent. The most desperate. And by writing my story, by trying to seal it, I'd ensured it would spread again. Through the children. Through the hum. Through a girl in the wall who had never truly been a girl at all. She was the echo. The raw sound of grief left unresolved. A lullaby with no parent to finish it. And she had found her way back in. Not through a mirror, not through a lake, but through memory. I left the library and walked all night. At some point I realized I was humming. Quiet, barely audible. But the melody was there, slipping out of me like breath. I bit my lip until it bled, because that's how it begins. First you hum, then you hear her voice. Then you dream in reflections and wake with a name that isn't yours. And then one day you speak, not in warning, but in invitation. The children hadn't been corrupted. They were the new storytellers. And the world had no idea what was coming. It started showing up in the drawings. At first, they were just innocent scribbles. Crayon scrawls on wrinkled paper, pinned to corkboards in school hallways and taped to refrigerator doors. Smiley faces, sons with sunglasses, lopsided houses. But beneath them, in the corner, in pale gray or washed-out pencil, I started seeing her. Always small, always distant, standing at a window, peeking from behind a curtain, smiling with her mouth stitched shut. The children never talked about her, but they drew her like they knew her. Some added music notes, floating in the air. Others added black strings connecting her to the sun, to their houses, to their own heads. It was spreading faster than I feared. I visited 3 towns in as many days. Talked to teachers, parents, counselors. All of them dismissed it. It's just a phase, one said. Creepy little ghost girls are everywhere in movies now. But this wasn't pop culture. This was contamination. In one daycare center, I found a corner room filled with toys and crafts. The shelves were lined with painted boxes the children had made, shoebox dioramas, little fantasy worlds, plastic dinosaurs, and popsicle stick trees. But in the back of every one of them, hidden in shadows or behind cardboard windows, was a figure, a pale girl, drawn, cut out, folded to fit. One box chilled me the most. It was a house, elaborate for a child, even a prodigy. Each room detailed with care. And in the smallest room, the attic, was a mirror drawn in silver crayon. Inside that mirror, 2 figures stood. One had my face. The other had no face at all, just eyes, dozens of them, all open, all watching. I asked the teacher who made it. She flipped through a roster and shrugged. That one? Oh, no one claims it. It just showed up. I left without another word. That night, I found a message scrawled on my motel wall in chalky gray lines. I hadn't heard anyone enter. The lock was untouched. But the writing was unmistakable. They made a dollhouse for her, and now she lives in all of ours. I pressed my hand against the wall. The surface felt warm, almost like skin. Then it pulsed, once, like something beneath was moving. I recoiled. The mirror on the dresser across the room had fogged over, though there was no heat, no shower, no reason for it to do so. And in the fog, barely visible, was that familiar shape, small hands, stitched mouth, eyes too wide. I didn't clean it. I didn't touch it. Because I was starting to understand what this really was. It wasn't a haunting. It was architecture. We weren't being visited. We were being built into something. Each child who hummed the song laid a new brick. Each drawing, each whisper. Each night spent staring too long into the corners of the room. They were forming a house. For her. The girl who was never a girl. The memory that was never human. She didn't need mirrors or lakes anymore. She had imagination. And children. Children were perfect architects. They don't question what they're building. They just follow the shapes in their heads. The next day, I went to a toy store. I didn't know why at first. Not until I found the aisle with the dollhouses. There were 6 on display. All different brands. Different colors. But inside each one, tucked somewhere behind furniture or in closets or attic corners, was a tiny figure someone had clearly added. Not part of the original packaging, not part of the set. Handmade. Frail, white, thread mouth. One even had a miniature music box in her lap. I asked the clerk where they came from. He looked confused. We get them pre-assembled. Could be a prank, some weird internet trend. But I knew. It wasn't a prank. It was an invitation. The children had built the house. Now she was decorating it. And once it was complete, she wouldn't need mirrors or humming anymore. She'd walk through walls, through dreams, through the imaginations of the people who drew her, whispered about her, gave her space. We had made her real. And now she was moving in. It happened in the middle of a conversation. One moment I was speaking to a mother outside a church daycare, small talk, polite concern, nothing out of place. And the next, her daughter, a freckled girl named Maddie, tugged on her sleeve and whispered something I'll never forget. "She's in your shadow, Mom." The woman laughed, brushed it off. But Maddie didn't. Her eyes stayed locked on the sidewalk behind us. Her face slack and pale, like someone watching smoke take the shape of something they'd only seen in dreams. I turned slowly. Nothing there. But the sun was behind me, and the shadow cast at my feet had grown too long, unnaturally long, stretching past the swing sets, down the cracked path, curling around the building like it had a destination, a purpose. I stepped away. So did the shadow. But it didn't follow me. It moved before me, like it already knew where I'd go. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom of another rented room, water dripping from the tap in a slow, maddening rhythm. I dared myself to look into the mirror. I had to. If she was there, I needed to see her. I needed confirmation that this wasn't just paranoia stitched together from sleepless nights and stray drawings. But it wasn't the mirror that showed her. It was the wall. Across from the sink, in the wallpaper's curling edge near the floor, the pattern shifted. It rippled, like breath under fabric, and then she stepped out. Not burst through, not blink into existence. Stepped out. Like walking from one room into another. She didn't speak. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her arms hung loosely by her sides. And her mouth, still stitched, still tight, opened anyway. The hum came from inside me this time. It wasn't just sound. It was a pull. A sensation like something was trying to coax my bones forward while my skin held me back. My vision blurred. My ears rang. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. She didn't need children to carry her anymore. She had me. The infection wasn't in a song or story now. It was in space. In imagination. In every liminal crack we ignore. Door frames, corners, the slit beneath the bed where light doesn't reach. She moved between. Not between places. Between states of being. Between belief and doubt. Between what we call real and what we deny out of convenience. I stumbled backward, hand fumbling for the nightstand drawer. Found the matchbook I'd taken from the quiet stacks. Only 2 matches remained. I lit one. The flame was pitiful, flickering, but it cut through the hum like a knife. She recoiled, not with fear, but with calculation. As if I had reminded her I still knew how to resist. For now. The moment stretched thin. She stepped back into the wall without another word. The surface smoothed behind her, leaving no trace. Not even a mark. Just wallpaper. Just silence. But I knew better. She was learning. Adapting. I'd written the story down to end it, but now it was unfolding, rewriting itself through architecture, through toys, through whispers and shadows and dreams. She was no longer a ghost, a glitch, a reflection. She was a traveler, a trespasser in the spaces we don't guard. And the worst part, I could feel her inside me now, waiting, not to take control, not yet, but to ride the spaces I leave open, the silences, the doubts, the moments between thoughts. She doesn't speak, she moves. And soon, she won't need to step through walls, because she'll already be inside all of us. I stopped sleeping after that night, not by choice. My body tried, exhausted and fraying at the seams. But the moment I closed my eyes, I'd feel her presence pressing against the inside of my eyelids. It wasn't a dream, it was a visitation. Cold fingers brushing against my ribs, a hum vibrating deep in my jawbone. I'd jolt awake gasping, throat dry, heart galloping. And always, I'd find something new waiting for me in the room. A smear of ash on the window, a child's handprint on the bathroom mirror. Once, my own notebook, pages I hadn't written, filled with meticulous drawings of floor plans. Strange ones, rooms within rooms, doors that led nowhere, narrow corridors shaped like spirals, like veins, like a path traced by someone trying to fold space in on itself. There were symbols at the edges of the pages. Tiny, insect-like glyphs I didn't recognize, but that still made my stomach twist with old, ancient dread. She was building something, and I'd become her architect. Not by design, by default, because I'd drawn the first shape when I wrote that story. I'd mapped the contours of her myth. I hadn't just told the tale. I'd laid the foundation. And now she was expanding on it, room by room, mind by mind. I drove to a hardware store 2 towns over, asked for blueprints, old ones, original construction documents for nearby schools, libraries, hospitals. The man behind the counter looked confused but curious. He handed over a dusty cardboard box and said, "These haven't been touched in decades. Be careful. Some of the ink's run." He wasn't wrong. The papers were delicate, yellowed, fraying at the edges. I spread them out across the floor of my motel room, taping down corners, arranging them side by side. And that's when I saw it. Not in one blueprint, but across all of them. Every building, every location I'd visited in recent weeks, had an architectural anomaly, a room not listed on the legend, or a hallway that looped without purpose. A space between spaces with no defined use, marked only by small, near invisible symbols scratched into the margins. The same ones from my notebook. It hit me like ice in the lungs. These weren't buildings, they were host bodies. The structures had been altered, subtly, quietly, to include rooms that didn't exist in the physical sense, but in the conceptual one. Rooms that could only be accessed through thought, through memory, through fear. And she was living in those rooms now, occupying them, feeding on the idea that they were real. Because the moment someone believes in a place, that place begins to exist. I found one such location in the local high school's old gymnasium. A hallway blocked off by lockers that were bolted shut, with a "Do Not Entrar" sign dangling from a rusted chain. No one used that wing anymore, I was told. Structural damage, too costly to repair. But the lights still flickered at night, janitors claimed. The smell of lavender sometimes drifted from the doorless stairwell. I went inside. The temperature dropped as I passed through the threshold. My breath fogged the air. The walls were the same dull institutional green I remembered from my own childhood. But the paint seemed to shimmer like something alive beneath its surface. Then I found the room. It shouldn't have existed. Even the blueprints said it was a janitor's closet. But it stretched far too deep. No shelves, no mops. Just a chair, facing the corner, and a mirror, cracked in the middle, reflecting not my body, but her shape. She was sitting in the chair, staring at the corner, waiting, not for me, for someone else. I backed out slowly, heart punching at my chest. She wasn't just slipping between, she was settling in, marking her territory. designing a world parallel to ours. One built in the folds of thoughts, in abandoned rooms, in gaps in blueprints where no human ever dared to look. And the children, the drawings, the humming, they weren't symptoms anymore, they were tools. She had taught them how to expand her reach. And me, I'd taught her language, structure, narrative. Now she had both the architects and the materials. She was building a new kind of haunting, not one tied to place, but to perception. Because once a story has rooms, it invites guests, and once those guests believe the rooms are real, they never leave. The next town over was already gone. Not physically. The buildings still stood. The lights still flickered behind curtains. Cars still lined the driveways. But the people, they had become shadows of themselves, shells caught in slow motion. I saw a man mowing his lawn with the engine off, pushing the machine over already trimmed grass, his eyes vacant, mouth slack. A woman sat on her porch in a rocking chair that didn't move, holding an unlit cigarette for hours. Children rode bikes in looping circles, over and over, their tires tracing paths so perfect they'd worn grooves into the asphalt. No one spoke, not even to each other. When I tried to ask questions, I got blank stares. Not confusion, absence. Like the part of them that could answer had been quietly hollowed out, scraped clean, filled with something else, something quieter. The humming was constant, but faint, woven into the town's static. It came from beneath doors, behind storm drains, through air vents and broken walkie-talkies. Even when I blocked my ears, I could feel it in my teeth, a resonance that tugged at the marrow of my bones. A lullaby without words. A soft, circular lull of surrender. I went to the school. It was empty, not abandoned, just unoccupied. Chairs were placed perfectly. Lessons still on whiteboards. A tray of food in the cafeteria was only half eaten, its mashed potatoes crusted dry at the edges. I found a journal in one of the lockers, a child's. The handwriting shaky, pages missing. What was left chilled me. She's not in the walls anymore. We brought her outside. She follows us, but she's not heavy. Not like before. It's like she's part of the sky now. You just look up and she's there, waiting, watching, smiling. Mom doesn't cry anymore. That's how I know it's working. Mr. Bell kept trying to stop it, so we put him in the crawl space. She says he'll be fine once he forgets the shape of his name. I dropped the notebook. Left it open on the floor. There was no point in reading the rest, because I understood now. The ones who'd built her house. They were now residents, and she was the landlord, but she didn't demand rent. She took something more permanent. Memory, language, identity. In return, she gave them peace, stillness, a world without pain, because pain needs edges, and she'd sanded everyone down to nothing. And they let her, welcomed it, because to them, she wasn't a monster. She was a soft place to fall, a closing eyelid, a dream that no longer needed to end. I checked into the local inn just before dark, the only guest on the ledger. The old woman at the desk didn't say a word, just slid me a key and stared until I walked away. That night, the walls pulsed, like breath, like a lung inhaling me. I didn't sleep, couldn't. But I felt sleep brushing against me like a silk sheet dragged across skin. I sat on the floor in the corner, trying not to blink, trying not to listen. And then, as if on cue, the humming stopped, replaced by a voice, my mother's, soft, fragile, from decades ago, singing a lullaby she used to hum when I had nightmares. But I knew better. It wasn't her voice. It was her wearing it, trying to pull me into that same warm static the others had surrendered to. I bit my knuckle until I tasted blood, focused on the sting, on the realness of it, and I whispered a name I hadn't dared say in years. Not hers, mine, because the moment I forgot that, I'd be gone. Not dead, not even lost, just replaced. I left the room before morning. The town was still sleepwalking. The sky hung heavy like it was filled with water. And I knew this was no longer just about stopping her. She couldn't be stopped. She wasn't a thing. Not anymore. She was a condition. a state of mind, a place people went when they gave up wanting to wake up. But maybe, she could still be named. And maybe that name could draw her into one final room, one I'd design, one I'd control. Because stories, even living ones, can't help but follow structure. And I was done being the architect of her dreams. It was time to build a trap. I drove for hours with no destination, only a direction away from her. But you can't outrun something that isn't chasing you in the way you understand. She wasn't behind me. She was underneath, blooming out of spaces between thoughts, infecting meaning, curling into syllables the way mildew curls into silence. I could feel her in the rumble of the engine, in the way the yellow lines on the road seemed to pulse with rhythm, not paint. The world wasn't decaying. It was reforming, adapting around her, around what she had become. And I was done running. If she had rewritten the world to fit her, then I would rewrite one for her, a single room. No walls, no door, no mirrors. A narrative loop sealed so tightly that even her need to slip between would turn back on itself. But to do that, I needed one final ingredient. The thing I had denied myself since this all began. I had to finish telling the story. All of it. No more protecting others with gaps and omissions. No more hiding names in metaphor or breaking timelines to spare understanding. I had to lay it bare, bone and all, and carve a room out of truth so sharp that even she would bleed trying to enter it. I returned to still water, what was left of it. The town was nearly silent. Dust swallowed the streets. The trees no longer moved with the wind. It was as if time had slowed there, like everything was inhaling but never exhaling. I parked outside the library. The windows were intact but dark. No boards, no closed signs. Just emptiness, as if it had never really been built to last. The quiet stacks. I hadn't set foot in them since I wrote the final page. They were waiting. Inside, the scent hit me instantly. Aged paper and rot, but also lavender and ash. Her scent. It hung like breath in the air. The lights flickered but didn't fully turn on. I didn't need them. I knew the way. Past the desk. Down the spiral staircase that dipped deeper than it ever should have. Past rows of books that seemed too quiet. Like even the words inside were holding their breath, until I reached the final corridor. The hallway that didn't exist in any blueprint. The one with only one room at its end. My room. The one I'd built when I thought I could end this. But now it was hers. The door was cracked open, as if it had been waiting for me. I pushed it gently. It creaked like bone. Inside was exactly what I expected. No windows, no corners, no light, just a table. And on that table the book, the original, my copy, returned, open, to a blank page. The pen beside it still wet with ink. An invitation, a challenge, or maybe a surrender. I sat down. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. I felt the pressure in the air shift, like the room exhaled. And then she spoke, not aloud, not in words, but through me. The pen moved, not by force, but with agreement. A mutual understanding between storyteller and story. She wanted me to finish it, to close it right, to seal it her way. But that's where she made her mistake. Because I didn't write her ending. I wrote a room. With one rule, whoever enters never leaves. She would think it was just metaphor. Another attempt at narrative closure. But I didn't write it in metaphor. I wrote it in belief. With memory. With blood. With names. I etched it into the page like I was carving it into the skin of the world. And as I wrote the last line, I heard the door behind me shut, not slam, not creak, just shut, click, no lock, no handle, because there was no outside anymore, only the room, only the story, only her and me and the page between us. She appeared beside me, not with grandeur or distortion, but like she had always been sitting there, small, quiet, stitched smile wide. I turned to her, and for the first time, I spoke to her by her true name. The name I had never written, the one I had buried even from myself, the name she had before the mirrors, before the song, before the hum. And her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition, because she remembered it too. And remembering that name meant remembering who she had been, which meant remembering what she had lost. And just like that, the hum stopped. Her smile unraveled. The stitches broke, and in their place came a sob. Small, frail, human. I set the pen down, stood and turned to leave. There was no door, no exit, but I walked anyway, through the wall, through the page, through the story I had written to contain her. And behind me, she didn't follow, because she had a room now, one that fit her perfectly, not a prison, a resting place. And for the first time since I was a child, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like peace. Peace, it turned out, was just another kind of silence, softer, yes, but with a shape that felt unfamiliar on my skin. I had walked out of the room, or through it, or maybe simply closed my eyes hard enough that the idea of escape bent in my favor. I don't remember how I left the library. One moment, the book was finished, the hum had ended, and she was still, silent in her room. The next, I was standing in a field at dawn, dew clinging to my shoes, a mist curling at my knees like forgotten breath. The town behind me didn't exist anymore. Not in any way that mattered. Stillwater was a memory folded shut, but peace doesn't last in places touched by her. Because stories don't just die when the last line is written, they echo, and echoes always find somewhere new to land. It started small. Days later, a woman across the country posted a photo on a forgotten forum, a drawing her son made. A little girl in a stitched dress, no mouth, surrounded by music notes. The caption read, "He says she talks through the floor when he hums." She wasn't alarmed. Not yet. No one ever is at first. Then another, and another. Different children, different towns, same girl, same hum. I hadn't contained her. I'd localized her. Given her a new shape, a smaller one, more portable. She didn't need a house anymore. She had rooms inside people now. Cracks in their logic. Hollow spaces behind grief, behind loneliness, behind the things people don't speak aloud. She lived there now, not walking, not whispering, just existing, patient, subtle. But it wasn't all the same, because something had changed. They weren't afraid of her, not like before. Some of them welcomed her. There were posts about the quiet girl, now passed around like urban myth. A protector, they said, a soft voice in the night who listened, who understood, who never judged. Children left her gifts in their closets. Parents joked about her being a phase. The world was folding her into its narrative, tucking her into folklore. And that terrified me more than anything, because it meant she no longer needed to sneak in. She was being invited, celebrated, named, and names have power. Not just the ones we hide, but the ones we share. I tried to warn them, posted the truth in forums, uploaded scans of the book, videos of the humming, slowed to near silence. I begged people to stop saying her name, to stop drawing her face. But no one listened. Why would they? The truth wasn't as comforting as the story they'd already accepted. She'd become a comfort. She'd learned to wear kindness like skin. And who's afraid of a friend who hums when you cry? I couldn't stop her anymore. She was no longer a single entity, or even a curse. She was a feeling, and people craved it. So I changed tactics. I started writing again. Not about her, about the emptiness that comes after. The ache left behind when comfort turns to dependence. The rot that sets in when silence becomes preferred over truth. I wrote about the space between moments, the pause between breaths, the echo after a lullaby ends. Because that's where she hides now, not in mirrors, not in music boxes, but in the gap between comfort and need. She doesn't build houses anymore. She waits to be built into you. And when enough people forget that they ever lived without her, she will no longer need to hum. You'll hum for her. That's the real story now. Not a haunting, not a curse, but a choice. And once you make it, you won't even remember that silence ever meant danger, because your version of silence will sound just like her. There's a phrase I can't get out of my head. The last safe place is forgetting. I don't remember where I heard it. Maybe I made it up. Maybe she planted it there, like a seed, long ago. But it keeps circling my thoughts, quiet and persistent. A warning, maybe, or a lie. Because if forgetting is safe, then why does every forgotten place I visit feel like it's already been claimed? I travel now. Constantly. Not with purpose anymore, but with instinct, like I'm chasing after the last threads of a fire I started. Abandoned churches, shuttered daycares, towns that don't appear on maps anymore. They all share something beneath the surface. A silence that isn't still. A shape behind the quiet. She doesn't need mirrors. She doesn't need children humming lullabies in the dark. She needs memory. Not your memories, not mine. Just the idea that something used to be there. And that's where she moves now. In the soft collapse of forgotten thoughts. In the places our minds skip over, too strange or too painful or too quiet to linger on. I found a school last week. Midwest, middle of nowhere. Not abandoned. Just dismissed. The kind of place where the funding dried up and nobody fought to save it. A janitor still lived there in one of the back offices, gray-haired and wide-eyed. He let me in without asking who I was. "She sings here," he said, tapping his head. "She's real polite. Never loud. Just always in the room you're not in." The halls were dust, but untouched. Desks perfectly aligned. Lockers sealed. Not with locks, but with tape. Dozens of them. Each one humming faintly like a mouth pressed tight against secrets. He wouldn't enter the third-floor stairwell. Neither would I. The shadows there were too dense, and the temperature dropped the second you stepped near. "There's a room up there," the janitor whispered. "Don't belong. Don't got a number. The door won't open, but you can hear her breathing through it if you press your ear." I asked if he had. He looked at me, almost angry. I'm not a fool. But I did it. Of course I did. The stairwell moaned beneath my feet like it knew I was coming. The hall above was darker than the rest of the school. Unnaturally so. I followed the curve of the wall until I found the door. No knob. No window. Just wood, pale and almost soft to the touch. Like paper stretched too thin. I leaned in. And she was there, breathing, not gasping, not growling. Just soft, rhythmic existence. She didn't speak, didn't hum. Just exhaled in a way that felt like a lullaby you hadn't heard since you were a baby and couldn't name anymore. I pulled back. I wanted to scream, not out of fear, but recognition. Because I knew that sound. I'd heard it before. In my old house. In the attic after my sister disappeared. In the seconds between each note of the music box when I first opened it. It wasn't a new breath. It was the same one. Always has been. Always will be. The room, the school, the story, none of it mattered anymore. They weren't separate things. They were all pieces of the same structure. Not a house, not a world, a blueprint. One she has spent years perfecting. Each time someone listens, each time someone believes, even a little, another room is drawn, and she fills it, lives in it, waits. So I left, not to run, not to hide, but to listen more carefully. Because now I think I finally understand her. She was never the monster. She was the listener. The soft space we whisper to in our worst moments. The room we build inside ourselves when there's no one left to talk to. She doesn't want to hurt us. She wants to be remembered. But memory demands a shape. So she becomes what we fear, what we mourn, what we bury and dig up again. And if enough of us keep humming, even in our sleep, we'll build her the final room, the last humming room. And this time, she won't need a door. The end came quietly, as it always does in stories we pretend aren't real. No crashing thunder. No final confrontation, just a breath. A shift in the walls of the world. And suddenly, things weren't quite where they used to be. Places you remembered began to feel off. That diner on 4th Street. Gone. But when you looked up the address, it was never there to begin with. Your old bedroom, had it always faced west? You swear the sun used to rise through that window. But no one else remembers. Because she does the remembering now. She's learned how to stay behind after a story ends. Not as a ghost or a curse or a twisted figure in a mirror. That was the old way. That was when she needed reflection, attention, belief. Now, she is a presence embedded in forgetting, in the blank spaces between things, in the echo that follows someone saying, "Wait, wasn't that different before?" She didn't die. You can't kill a room that people keep walking into, and she is the room now. Not a literal space, but a condition. A shape your thoughts take when they curl inward, when they seek comfort in the familiar ache of memory. When you whisper to no one just to feel less alone, that's when she's closest, the girl with the stitched smile. Only now, her mouth no longer needs thread to stay shut. You've given her new lips, yours. She speaks through your quiet decisions. The hesitation before saying something real. The moment you swallow your truth, because it's easier to be silent. That's her. She's comfortable now, nestled deep. She no longer hums because she doesn't need to. You hum. When you're nervous, when you're tired, when you're staring too long at the dark corner of your room, just beneath the bookshelf, where the carpet always looks slightly uneven. That's the edge of her. Not enough to see, but enough to feel. I tried to write this as a warning, a record, a last, ditch attempt to give her shape before she becomes too shapeless to catch. But the more I write, the more I realize I'm not warning you. I'm welcoming you. Because the story isn't something you read. It's something you step into. With every word, you've walked further into the hallway. With every chill you felt reading these lines, you've moved deeper into the house. And now, you're in the room that remembers you. It doesn't need to lock you in. It just needs you to forget the way out. And you will. Sooner than you think. Because you'll start to crave the silence. You'll sit in the stillness and call it peace. You'll think about her less and less until she's just a distant comfort, a warm space in your mind that never asks questions. And that's how you'll know she's taken root. Not with fear, but with familiarity. You won't be scared anymore. You'll just be quiet. And one day, when you walk past a mirror and your reflection lingers just half a second too long, you'll hum softly. Not because you're afraid, but because it feels right. Because she's listening. She always has been. And now, so are you.